So there's a habit you've tried to start about 4 times now, and you know exactly which one it is because you thought of it just then. Here's a boy in his second year of high school. A classmate takes a full swing with a baseball bat. It slips out of his hands and it hits him in the face. Broken nose, multiple skull fractures, 2 shattered eye sockets. He's flown to hospital, put in a medically induced coma, and a priest is sent to give him last rites. He wakes up, and a year later, he can't get back on the school baseball team. That boy is James Clear, and the book he eventually wrote has sold over 20 million copies because of what he did next, which was almost nothing. He fixed his sleep. He tidied his room. He went to the gym. Tiny things, embarrassingly small things. So here's the whole book. Every chapter in Clear's own order, all 20, all 4 laws, every story. The British cycling team that won by cleaning their tyres, the 2-minute rule, the one about identity that almost nobody actually uses, and at the end, the honest part, because this is the most actionable book on this channel and people still don't do it, and I want to talk about why. It starts with a chart that isn't quite maths. Chapter 1. The Surprising Power of Atomic Habits. So, in 2003, British Cycling hires a man called Dave Brailsford, and the job he's been given is close to hopeless, because British cyclists had been, to put it gently, mediocre for about 100 years. 1 gold medal at the Olympics since 1908. 1. And in the Tour de France, the biggest race there is, no British cyclist had ever won it. Not once in 110 years. It was so bad that one of the top bike manufacturers in Europe refused to sell bikes to the British team. Refused. Because they were worried that being associated with them would hurt sales. And Brailsford's approach was not what anybody expected. He didn't hunt for a superstar. He didn't buy some transformative technology. He said this: if you break down everything you could think of that goes into riding a bike and improve each element by 1%, you'll get a significant increase when you put them all together. 1% on everything. So they started with the obvious: lighter tires, better seats. Then they went further, and this is where it gets slightly absurd. They tested different massage gels to see which one helped muscles recover fastest. They hired a surgeon to teach each rider how to wash their hands properly to reduce the chance of catching a cold. They worked out which pillow and which mattress gave each individual rider the best night's sleep, and then they took that exact pillow and mattress with them to every hotel. They painted the inside of the team truck white, so they could spot specks of dust that would normally go unnoticed because dust degrades the finely tuned bike parts. Every single one of those is, by itself, a joke. Not one of them wins a race. 5 years after Brailsford took over, the British cycling team dominated the road and track events at the 2008 Beijing Olympics, winning about 60% of the gold medals available. 4 years later in London, they set 9 Olympic records and 7 world records. And that year, Bradley Wiggins became the first British cyclist ever to win the Tour de France. The next year, his teammate Chris Froome won it. And Froome won it again in 2015, 2016 and 2017. 5 British Tour de France victories in 6 years. From a team nobody would sell a bike to. So that's the parable, and here's what it's for. We massively overrate the big moment, and massively underrate small improvements made daily. Because a 1% improvement is not noticeable. Sometimes it isn't even measurable. You do it and nothing happens, and that's precisely the problem. You get no feedback, so you stop. And Clear does the arithmetic, and I want to be careful with it, because the arithmetic is doing a lot of persuasive work in this book, and we should look at it properly. If you get 1% better every day for a year, you end up 37 times better by the end. And if you get 1% worse every day for a year, you decline nearly down to 0. 37 times. That's the number everyone quotes. It's on 1,000 LinkedIn posts, and it is real arithmetic. 1.01 to the power of 365 is 37.78. Now, hold that thought, because I'm going to come back to it in the honest chapter at the end, and I don't think it means what people think it means. But the direction of the idea is right, and the direction is the thing worth having. Habits are the compound interest of self-improvement. Money multiplies through compound interest. The effects of your habits multiply as you repeat them. On any given day, the difference is tiny. You have one bad meal, you skip one workout, you do one late night. Nothing happens. The results of a single day are almost never noticeable. But over 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, the effects of good habits and bad habits compound, and they compound in a way that only becomes visible long after the point where you could have easily changed course. And this is where the chapter stops being motivational and starts being genuinely useful, because Clear names the thing that makes all of this so hard to actually do. He calls it the plateau of latent potential. Here's the version I find impossible to forget. Imagine an ice cube sitting on a table in a very cold room. You start warming the room. 25 degrees, nothing. 26, nothing. 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, still nothing, just a solid block of ice. 32 degrees, and the ice begins to melt. Now, what melted the ice? Was it the last degree? Because that's what it looks like. That's what it would look like on the news, and that's how you'd tell the story afterwards. But every single degree before it was doing the work. All of it was accumulating. The 1 degree shift that finally produced the change had no more power than the 30 before it. It just arrived at the threshold. And Clear's line about this is the sharpest sentence in the chapter. Breakthrough moments are often the result of many previous actions, which build up the potential required to unleash a major change. Which means, and this is the part that should genuinely change your behavior, when you're working hard at something and nothing seems to be happening, that is not evidence that it isn't working. That is what the early part of working looks like. You are not being punished. You're at 29 degrees. But of course, from the inside, 29 degrees and this doesn't work feel absolutely identical. There is no way to tell them apart in the moment. That's the whole trap, and it's why most people quit, not from weakness, but from a completely reasonable reading of the available evidence. So then, what do you do about it? And here Clear makes the move that the rest of the book is built on, and it's the one idea in modern self-help that I think is actually new. Forget about goals. Focus on systems instead. Goals are the results you want. Systems are the processes that lead to those results. And his argument is not that goals are bad. It's more specific than that, and there are 4 parts to it. 1. Winners and losers have the same goals. Every Olympic athlete wants to win a gold medal. Every candidate wants the job. If successful and unsuccessful people share the same goals, then the goal cannot be what separates them. 2. Achieving a goal is only a momentary change. You clean your messy room and it's clean. And if you keep the same habits that made it messy, you're just going to need another cleaning session. You've treated a symptom. 3. Goals restrict your happiness. Because the implied assumption is, once I reach the goal, then I'll be happy. You've postponed satisfaction until a specific milestone, and there's always another one. A systems-first approach means you can be satisfied any time your system is running. 4. And this is the one that really lands. Goals are at odds with long-term progress. What happens after you run the marathon? A lot of people stop training. The goal was the motivation, and the goal is gone. So Clear's line, you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. Now, my honest note, because this chapter is unusually easy to nod along to. Systems, not goals, is very good advice, and it is also, as stated, almost impossible to be wrong about. If you succeed, your system worked. If you fail, your system was bad. There's no result that could disprove it. Keep that in your pocket. I'll come back to it. But the practical core is solid, and here's how I'd put it to you. The question isn't, what do I want to achieve? You've answered that 100 times and it hasn't helped. The question is, what would I have to do repeatedly that I could keep doing on a bad week? Because that's the system, not the ambition, the thing that survives a bad week. So, the question for this one, think of the goal you've set and reset and set again. The fitness one, the money one, the writing one. Now tell me what your system is. Not what you want. What do you actually do, on which days, at what time, in what order? If you can't answer that in one sentence, you don't have a system. You have a wish with a deadline attached, and Brailsford didn't win the Tour de France with a wish. He won it by painting the inside of a truck white. Which sets up Chapter 2, and Chapter 2 is the one that explains why all of this fails even when you know it, because the way you've been trying to change is the wrong way round. Chapter 2. How your habits shape your identity and vice versa. So, two people are at a party, and someone offers them both a cigarette. The first one says, "No thanks, I'm trying to quit." Reasonable, polite, exactly what you'd say. And Clear's observation about that sentence is the whole chapter. That person still believes they are a smoker. They're just a smoker who is currently resisting. They're hoping to be something else, while their self-image stays exactly where it was. The second person says, "No thanks, I'm not a smoker." Same refusal, completely different mechanism. That's not a person fighting an urge, that's a person for whom the offer doesn't really apply. And Clear's point is that the first person is going to have to make that same decision, with the same friction, every single time, forever. The second person has to make it once. Now, why is changing habits so hard in general? Clear says there are two reasons. We try to change the wrong thing, and we try to change it in the wrong way. So let's do the thing first, and he uses an onion for it. 3 layers. The outer layer is outcomes. Losing the weight, publishing the book, winning the championship. Most of the goals you set live here. The middle layer is processes, the workout routine, the writing schedule, the way you keep your desk. Most of the habits you build live here. The innermost layer is identity, your beliefs, your worldview, your judgments about yourself and other people. Most of what you believe lives here, and you almost never touch it deliberately. Now, none of those layers is bad, but the direction matters enormously. Most people start on the outside and work in. Outcome-based habits. I want this result, so I'll build this process. And it works, for a while, and then it stops. Clear's argument is to run it the other way. Identity-based habits. Start with who you wish to become, and let the behaviour follow. And to see why that isn't just semantics, take the same goal at both angles. The goal is a fitter body. The outcome-based version says, I want to lose 20 pounds, so I'd better go running. The identity-based version says, I want to become the kind of person who doesn't miss workouts. Or reading. Outcome, I want to read a book a month. Identity, I want to become a reader. They look interchangeable. They are not, and here's the difference that matters. What happens when it stops being fun? Because the outcome person is running a transaction. Effort now for a result later. And a transaction can be cancelled the moment the price feels too high or the result stops arriving. And it will stop arriving. That's the plateau of latent potential from Chapter 1. The identity person isn't running a transaction. They're being consistent with who they are. And people will do extraordinary things to stay consistent with their own self-image. That's not motivation. That's something much sturdier and much more automatic. Clear puts it plainly. The ultimate form of intrinsic motivation is when a habit becomes part of your identity. It's one thing to say, I'm the kind of person who wants this. It's something very different to say, I'm the kind of person who is this. And then he says the thing that makes people uncomfortable, which is that the reverse is also true. Your identity is currently holding some of your bad habits in place. You have beliefs like, I'm terrible with names, I'm not a morning person, I'm bad with money, I'm just not disciplined. You almost certainly said one of those to someone this month. And you said it as though you were reporting a fact about the weather. But where did that belief come from? It came from evidence. You forgot some names, so you concluded you're bad at names, so you stopped trying to remember them, which produced more evidence, which reinforced the belief. Clear's line: the more deeply a thought or action is tied to your identity, the more difficult it is to change it. So now, how do you actually change an identity, given that you can't just decide to believe something about yourself? And this is the mechanism, and it's the best idea in the book, and I want to give it to you exactly. Your habits are how you embody your identity. Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. Not a vote in the sense of a nice metaphor, a vote in the specific sense that it is one piece of evidence, and identity is built from an accumulation of evidence. Make your bed. One vote for being an organized person. Write one line. One vote for being a writer. Go to the gym for 5 minutes. One vote for being an athlete. And no single vote does anything. That's the point. That's chapter 1 again, in a different costume. One instance doesn't matter, the accumulation is everything. Which produces a genuinely liberating consequence. You don't need a unanimous vote to win an election, you need a majority. So the occasional bad meal, the skipped session, the wasted afternoon, those are votes for the other side, and they don't decide the outcome. You just need the tally to lean. And Clear is careful here, in a way I appreciate. He says, this is not about having high self-esteem or telling yourself nice things. He's specifically against affirmations divorced from evidence. The process is not believe it and it'll be true. The process is do the small thing, collect the evidence, let the belief follow the proof. It's the opposite direction from how we usually assume confidence works. So the two-step version, which is as close to a procedure as this chapter gets. 1. Decide the type of person you want to be. 2. Prove it to yourself with small wins. And then ask the question that turns it operational. Not what do I want, but who is the type of person who could get the outcome I want? Who is the type of person who could lose £100? Probably someone who never misses a workout. And now you're not chasing £100, you're chasing the next workout, which is a thing you can actually do today. Now, my honest note on this chapter, because I think it's the strongest idea in the book and it still has a soft edge. Every action is a vote is beautifully clean, and it quietly assumes that the votes get counted. But identity isn't only built from your own actions, it's built from what other people reflect back at you, from where you grew up, from what you were told at 9 years old. Some people are casting votes into a system that has been rigged against them for a long time by things that aren't habits at all. The chapter doesn't deal with that, and it doesn't need to for the mechanism to work. But if you've been voting for a while and the identity hasn't shifted, it may not be that you haven't voted enough. It may be that something else is holding it in place, and that's a Covey problem, not a Clear problem, and it's why I keep saying these books need each other. So, the question. Finish this sentence honestly. I'm just not the kind of person who. You'll have one. Everyone has one, and it comes out fast, which tells you how settled it is. Now, what's the evidence for it? Not the feeling, the evidence. And the follow-up, which is the whole chapter in one move. What is the smallest possible thing you could do today that a person who was that kind of person would obviously do? Because that's one vote, and you've been counting the other side's votes for years without ever casting one of your own. Which brings us to chapter 3, where Clear stops describing what to change and starts giving you the machinery, a 4-step loop that runs underneath every habit you have, good or bad, and which he got from a psychologist experimenting on cats in 1898. Chapter 3. How to Build Better Habits in 4 Simple Steps. So in 1898, a psychologist called Edward Thorndike puts a cat in a box. The box is a puzzle. There's a door, and the door opens if the cat does one specific simple thing. Pulls a loop of cord, presses a lever, steps on a platform. Do the thing, the door opens, and there's food outside. And the first time, the cat has no idea. It sniffs around the corners, it sticks its paws through the gaps, it claws at anything loose. It's just doing cat things at random, for a few minutes. And then, at some point, it happens to hit the lever. The door opens, and out it goes. Thorndike then did the thing that made it science. He ran it again, and again, and he timed it. First attempt, about 90 seconds. After 20 or 30 trials, about 6 seconds. The cat had gone from random flailing to walking in and immediately pressing the lever. And Thorndike wrote the conclusion in a sentence that basically founded the field. Behaviours followed by satisfying consequences tend to be repeated, and those producing unpleasant consequences are less likely to be repeated. That's it. That's the whole engine. And here's why it matters to you rather than to a cat. That is precisely what happens every time you learn anything. The first time you drove a car, it took your entire brain. Now you do it while having a conversation and thinking about something else entirely. Clear's framing of what's actually going on. Habits are simply reliable solutions to recurring problems in our environment. Your brain is, in a very real sense, lazy, and that's not an insult, it's efficiency. Building habits is how it saves effort. When a behaviour becomes automatic, the conscious mind gets to stop supervising it and go do something else. Which produces a nice inversion of the usual complaint. People say habits restrict freedom. Clear argues the opposite. Habits don't restrict freedom, they create it. The person without good money habits is always fighting about money. The person without good health habits is always tired. Get the basics automated and you free up the attention for the things that actually need you. Now, the machinery. And this is the spine of the entire book, so it's worth getting exactly right. Every habit runs a 4-step loop. Cue, craving, response, reward. Cue, the trigger. A bit of information that predicts a reward. Your brain is constantly scanning for these. The smell of the bakery, the phone buzzing, walking into the kitchen. The cue itself is meaningless. It only matters because of what it predicts. Craving, the motivational force. And this is the step people skip, so I want to be precise. You are never craving the habit itself. You're craving the change in state it delivers. You don't crave smoking a cigarette, you crave the relief. You don't crave brushing your teeth, you crave a clean feeling mouth. Every craving is tied to a desire to change your internal state, and the cue is meaningless until it's been interpreted into a craving. Response, the actual habit, the thought or action you perform. And whether it happens comes down to 2 things, how motivated you are and how much friction is in the way. If a behaviour requires more effort than you're willing to spend, you won't do it, no matter how much you want the reward. Reward, the end goal. And rewards do 2 jobs. They satisfy the craving and, this is the important one, they teach you. The reward is the feedback that tells your brain that cue was worth noticing. Remember this loop for next time. Cue, craving, response, reward. Cue, craving, response, reward. Round and round, thousands of times, until it runs without you. And Clear splits it usefully. The cue and the craving are the problem phase. Something's wrong. You want it changed. The response and the reward are the solution phase. You act and the state changes. Try it on something ordinary. Your phone buzzes. That's the cue. You want to know what the message says. That's the craving. Notice you don't crave holding a phone. You crave the resolution of not knowing. You pick it up and read it. Response. You've satisfied the craving, and you've also strengthened the association between phone buzzing and pick it up. Reward. Repeat that 400 times a day for 10 years, and you have the defining behavior of the age. Now, here's where the chapter earns its place, because Clear turns the loop into a tool rather than a description. If a habit is made of 4 steps, then building a good habit means making each step work for you, and breaking a bad one means breaking any single link in the chain. He calls it the 4 laws of behavior change, and they are the structure of everything that follows. To build a good habit, make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, make it satisfying. To break a bad one, invert each. Make it invisible, make it unattractive, make it difficult, make it unsatisfying. Cue, obvious. Craving, attractive. Response, easy. Reward, satisfying. That's the map for the next 17 chapters, and I want you to notice how modest it is. There's no willpower in it. There's no want it more. Every one of the 4 is about arranging the conditions rather than summoning the character. And Clear says this outright, and it's the sentence I'd keep if I could keep one from the chapter. You do not need to be the victim of your environment, you can also be the architect of it. Now, my honest note. The 4 laws are a genuinely good organizing frame, and they're also not a discovery. This is the cue, routine, reward loop from Charles Duhigg's book, which came from decades of behavior psychology, which came from Thorndike, whose cats we started with. Clear is upfront about that lineage. What he adds, and it's a real addition, not repackaging, is the craving step as a distinct thing and the 4 inversions as a practical checklist. That's what makes it usable rather than merely true. But be a bit careful with how clean it feels. Real behavior is messier than 4 boxes. Plenty of things you do have no clear cue, or several, or the reward is decades away. The loop is a useful lens, not a law of physics, and treating it as physics is how people end up optimizing a system that was never the problem. So, the question, and this one is genuinely worth doing rather than just hearing, take the bad habit you'd most like to lose. Not a big one. The daily, dull, slightly embarrassing one. Now name all 4 parts. What is the cue? Where are you? What time is it? What just happened? Who are you with? What is the craving? And be honest, what state are you actually trying to change? What is the response? And what is the reward? What does it genuinely give you, even if only for 11 seconds? Most people can name the response instantly and cannot name the cue at all, which is the entire problem, and it's why chapter 4 is where the book properly begins, because you cannot change a cue you've never once noticed. Chapter 4. The Man Who Didn't Look Right. This is the first law. Make it obvious. So, if you've ever been on a train in Japan, you may have seen something that looks completely mad and is in fact one of the great safety systems in the world. The driver points at things. Out loud. He points at a signal and says its colour. He points at the speedometer and says the speed. As the train pulls in, he points at the platform edge and calls the stopping position. The conductor on the platform points down the track and calls it clear. Grown professionals, in uniform, pointing at objects and announcing them like children. It's called pointing and calling, and it reduces errors by up to 85% and cuts accidents by 30%. When the New York subway adopted a modified version, incidents of incorrectly berthed subways fell 57%. 57%. From pointing at things and saying them out loud. And it works for a reason that is exactly the subject of this chapter. It drags an automatic action up into conscious awareness. The driver already knows the signal is green. He's seen 10,000 green signals. His eyes take it in without troubling his brain. And that's the danger. So the system forces him to move a hand and use his voice. And suddenly, a process that had gone unconscious is conscious again. Now, why does a habits book need that? Because here's the problem Clear is setting up, and I think it's the least appreciated idea in the whole book. With enough repetition, your behavior stops passing through your awareness at all. He gives an example that stuck with me. A retail clerk was told to cut up empty gift cards after customers used them. Fine. Then one day a run of customers paid by gift card, and when the next customer handed over an actual credit card, the clerk took it and cut it in half. She wasn't distracted, she wasn't stupid. The behavior had become non-conscious, and the cue was similar enough that the loop just ran. And that is the state most of your day is in. Clear's point: you don't need to be aware of a cue for a habit to begin, which means you have a large number of behaviors running on autopilot that you have literally never examined, and you cannot change what you have never noticed. So before any of the 4 laws can help you, there's a step underneath them all. Become aware of what you're actually doing. And the tool is a personal pointing and calling. He calls it the Habits Scorecard. The instruction is simple and slightly tedious, which is usually a good sign. Write down your daily habits. All of them. Not the big ones, the whole list. The boring, granular list. Wake up. Turn off alarm. Check phone. Go to the bathroom. Weigh yourself. Take a shower. Brush your teeth. Get dressed. Make coffee. Sit down. Check phone again. You'll get a list of 30 or 40 things you do before you have properly started the day, most of which you've never once thought about. Then, next to each one, mark it. Is this a good habit, a bad habit, or a neutral one? Plus, minus, or equals. And Clear is careful about the marking because good and bad are lazy words. The better question is, does this behavior help me become the type of person I wish to be? Does this habit cast a vote for or against my desired identity? That's Chapter 2 doing work here. Habits that reinforce your desired identity are positive. Habits that fight it are negative. Which also means the same act can be positive for one person and negative for another. Eating a bacon sandwich helps a wrestler making weight and hurts a politician on a diet. It depends entirely on what you're voting for. Now, the crucial instruction, and it's the one people skip. Do not try to change anything while you make the list. The point is not improvement, the point is observation. You are not trying to fix the behavior, you are trying to see it, because seeing it accurately is a separate skill and you don't currently have it. And Clear adds a small technique that I've found genuinely does something. As you go through the day, say the action out loud. I'm about to eat this and I don't need it. Eating it will make me gain weight and hurt my health. It feels ridiculous. Feeling ridiculous is not evidence that it doesn't work. Remember the man in uniform pointing at a signal. Hearing your own bad habits spoken aloud makes the consequences seem more real. It puts a gap between the cue and the response, and the gap is where the change lives. So the whole chapter reduces to something small. The process of behavior change always starts with awareness. Now, my honest note. The Habits Scorecard is one of the few genuinely free exercises in self-improvement. It costs 10 minutes and no money, and almost nobody does it, including people who love this book. I've read this chapter multiple times and I've completed the scorecard once, badly. Why? I think because it produces no feeling of progress. There's nothing to post about, nothing to buy, no visible before and after. And it asks you to look unflinchingly at how you actually spend a Tuesday, which is uncomfortable in a very specific way. Most people, doing this honestly, discover that their day is not a series of choices at all. It's a sequence of triggered responses with a thin narrative laid over the top afterwards. That's a genuinely unsettling thing to learn about yourself, and I suspect it's the real reason the exercise gets skipped rather than the 10 minutes. So, the question: what did you do in the first 15 minutes after you woke up this morning? In order, every step. Don't summarise, list it. Now, how many of those were decisions? Because if the honest answer is none of them, that's just what happens, then you've just found the part of your life that is running without you, and it's roughly the same part every single morning. Which brings us to chapter 5, where Clear stops asking you to notice cues and starts having you plant them, with a technique that more than doubled how often people exercised in a controlled study, using nothing but a sentence. Chapter 5. The best way to start a new habit. So, there's a study in Britain where researchers took a couple of hundred people and tried to get them to exercise, and they split them into 3 groups. Group 1 was the control. They were just asked to track how often they exercised. That's it. Group 2 was the motivation group. Same tracking, but they also read material on the benefits of exercise, and it was explained to them how exercise reduces the risk of heart disease and improves heart health. Proper, sensible, evidence-based encouragement. Group 3 got the same motivational material, and then 1 extra instruction. They were asked to write a sentence, specifically to complete this: during the next week, I will partake in at least 20 minutes of vigorous exercise on, day, at, time, in, place. Fill in the blanks. That's the whole intervention. Now the results. In the first group, 35 to 38% exercised at least once a week. In the second group, the motivated group, the ones who'd been told exactly why it mattered, 35 to 38%. Statistically, no different from doing nothing. In the third group, 91% exercised at least once a week, more than double the normal rate, from a fill-in-the-blank sentence. And notice what that tells you about motivation, because it's brutal. The motivational material had no measurable effect at all. None. The thing that worked wasn't wanting it more. It was deciding in advance when and where. This is called an implementation intention, and the format is I will, behaviour, at, time, in, locations. Hundreds of studies have found the same thing across sticking to exercise, remembering vaccinations, voting, giving up smoking. And the reason it works is that most of us are not short of motivation, we are short of clarity. Clear's line: many people think they lack motivation when what they really lack is clarity. Because I'll exercise more isn't a plan, it's a mood. It leaves the actual decision, when, where, in what shoes, to be made later by a version of you who is tired and has other options. Whereas I will run at 7 a.m. in the park has already made every decision that matters. All that remains is to execute it. And there's a second effect underneath. Once you've made the plan, you stop waiting for inspiration. You're not sitting there asking whether you feel like it. The time arrives and the cue is the time itself. So that's the first tool. Here's the second, and it's more useful still because it solves the harder problem. What if you don't have a reliable time and place? Habit stacking. The insight is that you already have hundreds of established cues in your day. You brush your teeth, you pour a coffee, you sit down at your desk, you take off your shoes. Each of those is a stable, reliable trigger that already fires without any effort from you. So instead of inventing a new cue, you attach the new habit to an existing one. After current habit, I will new habit. After I pour my morning coffee, I will meditate for 1 minute. After I take off my work shoes, I will change into my gym clothes. After I sit down to dinner, I will say one thing I'm grateful for. Clear got the idea from a concept in behavioral science called the Diderot effect, and from B.J. Fogg's work at Stanford, and he extends it in an obvious but powerful way. You can chain them. After I pour the coffee, I meditate. After I meditate, I write my to-do list. After I write the list, I start the first task. Now you have a morning routine that runs off a single trigger. And the key advantage over the time and place version is that habit stacking works when your schedule doesn't. If your days are chaotic, shift work, small children, freelance, then 7 a.m. in the park is a plan that will fail through no fault of yours. But after I put the baby down happens whenever it happens, and it happens every day. Now, the park people get wrong. Habit stacking fails when the cue is vague. After I finish work sounds specific and isn't. What does finishing mean? Closing the laptop? Leaving the building? The last email? If you can't point at a precise moment, your brain will keep negotiating about whether the moment has arrived, and negotiation is where habits die. Clear's test is good. The cue should be as specific and immediately actionable as possible. Not when I have more time. Not in the mornings. A single, unambiguous, observable event. The other failure is stacking onto something that doesn't happen every day. If you stack your new habit onto after my weekly team meeting, you've built a weekly habit and it will never become automatic. So, my honest note on this chapter. That 91% figure is the most striking number in the book, and I want to be careful with it because it does a lot of persuading. It's one study over 2 weeks on exercise in one country, and exercised at least once is a low bar. It is genuinely good evidence that specificity beats motivation. It is not evidence that a sentence will fix your life. What I'd take from it is narrower and more durable. The useful unit of planning is not the intention, it's the appointment. And there's something quietly humbling in it, which is that Group 2, the well-informed, well-motivated group, performed identically to the group who were told nothing. Everyone reading a self-improvement book is in Group 2 right now, including you, including me writing this. Understanding why it matters changes nothing. That's not cynicism, that's the measured result. So, the question, and this one has a right answer that only you know. What's the habit you've been meaning to start? Now say the sentence out loud. I will, what, at what time, in what place. If you can't fill in all 3 blanks, that is not a motivation problem, and no amount of watching videos like this one will fix it. You just haven't decided yet. And if the honest answer is that you don't know where it would fit, then use the other one. What is the thing you already do every single day without fail that this could hang off? Because that's the hook, and you've already got hundreds of them. Which leads into Chapter 6, and Chapter 6 is where Clear makes a claim that sounds like an insult and is actually a relief. That your environment matters more than your motivation, and that self-control is largely a myth about people who arrange their kitchens well. Chapter 6. Motivation is overrated. Environment often matters more. So, a doctor at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston decides to run an experiment on the people eating in her own cafeteria, and she doesn't tell any of them. Her name is Anne Thorndike, and her hypothesis was that she could improve the eating habits of thousands of hospital staff and visitors without changing their willpower or motivation in the slightest. Without, in fact, saying a single word to any of them. Here's what she and her team did. They changed where the drinks were. The refrigerators next to the tills were filled only with soda, so they added water to each one. And they put baskets of bottled water down beside the food stations across the room. Soda was still in the fridges. Nothing was removed. Nothing was banned. Water was simply now available in more places. Over the next 3 months, soda sales dropped by 11.4%, and bottled water sales rose by 25.8%. Nobody was told anything. Nobody made a decision to be healthier. Nobody's motivation changed. They just made water easier to see and easier to reach, and thousands of people quietly changed what they drank. And Clear's conclusion is the chapter. People often choose products not because of what they are, but because of where they are. Now, why does location have that kind of power over us? And the answer goes deeper than convenience. Human beings are, of all the senses, overwhelmingly visual. Something like 10 million of the roughly 11 million sensory receptors in your body are dedicated to sight. A huge share of your brain is devoted to processing what you see, which means in practice that a small change in what you see can lead to a big shift in what you do. Your environment is not a neutral backdrop you happen to be standing in. It is a constant stream of cues, and you have been responding to them all day, mostly without noticing. Clear puts it sharply. Environment is the invisible hand that shapes human behavior. So the practical instruction of the first law, make it obvious, is not really about noticing more. It's about designing your environment so the good cues are unavoidable and the bad ones are absent. Some examples, and notice how stupidly simple they are. Want to practice guitar more? Leave the guitar out on a stand in the middle of the room, not in its case in a cupboard. Want to drink more water? Fill a few bottles in the morning and put them in the places you spend time. Want to remember to take a pill? Put it next to the tap where you brush your teeth. None of that requires you to become a better person. That's the entire point. And Clear inverts it too. If you can't stop eating biscuits, the answer is not to fight biscuits, it's to not have biscuits in the house. If you can't stop checking your phone in bed, the answer is to charge the phone in another room. He has a line for this that I think is one of the most useful in the book. Make the cues of your good habits obvious and the cues of your bad habits invisible. Now here's the second half of the chapter, and it's the bit that changed how I think about my own flat. Habits are associated with contexts, not just objects. Clear talks about how we assign spaces jobs. The kitchen is for cooking, the bedroom is for sleeping, and how badly this goes wrong when the spaces blur. When you work in bed, watch television in bed, and answer email in bed, your bed stops meaning sleep. It means everything, which means it cues nothing in particular. And his fix is genuinely practical. One space, one use. If possible, give each habit its own context. Work at a desk that is only for work. Eat at the table. Read in the chair. If you live in one room and can't give each activity its own place, then subdivide. This chair is for reading. That corner is for the laptop. Because you'll find you can create a new habit in a new context far more easily than you can create one in a context already saturated with an old habit. And that's the setup for the story in the next chapter, which is one of the strangest findings in behavioural science. But before that, I want to draw out something Clear says almost in passing, which I think is the most liberating idea in the chapter. Self-control is easier in a disciplined environment than through discipline itself. Which means the people you think of as having enormous willpower are, very often, people who have simply arranged their lives so that willpower is rarely required. They are not resisting biscuits all day. There are no biscuits. That reframes something a lot of people carry around as a personal failing. If you feel like you're constantly fighting yourself, the problem may not be that you're weak. It may be that you're living inside an environment engineered, sometimes by companies with enormous budgets, to trigger the exact behavior you're trying to stop. You are not required to win that fight by being stronger. You're allowed to change the room. Now, my honest note. The cafeteria study is a good one, and I want to be exact about its size, because it gets exaggerated. An 11.4% drop in soda sales is a real effect, and a modest one. It is not changing the environment transforms behavior, it's changing the environment nudges behavior reliably, at scale, for free. That's still an excellent deal. Free and reliable is rare. But if you're expecting to redesign your kitchen and become a different person, that's not what the evidence says. And there's a limit Clear doesn't much address. Environment design assumes you control your environment. Choosing where the water is requires a kitchen you own, a room you can rearrange, a job that lets you set up your desk. Not everyone has that. Someone in a shared house or a hostel or a job on someone else's floor has far fewer levers than the book assumes. The principle still holds. The number of available levers doesn't. So, the question. Look around the room you're in right now. Actually look. What is the first object you see that is a cue for a habit you don't want? It'll be within about 6 feet of you. It usually is. And then the harder half. What would the room look like if it had been designed by someone who wanted you to do the thing you say you want to do? Because right now, most people's rooms have been designed, quite carefully, by other people to produce a completely different set of behaviors. Which takes us to Chapter 7 and the American soldiers in Vietnam, where the environment idea stops being about kitchens and starts being about something much more serious. Chapter 7. The Secret to Self-Control. So, in 1971, the Vietnam War is heading into its 16th year, and 2 congressmen come back from a visit with a finding that terrifies Washington. Over 15% of American soldiers stationed in Vietnam were heroin addicts. Follow-up research found that 35% of service members there had tried heroin, and as many as 20% were addicted. 20%, and these were men who were going to come home. The reaction was what you'd expect. This was going to be a public health catastrophe. Tens of thousands of addicted veterans arriving back into American towns. A special office was set up. Research was commissioned. One of the researchers in charge was a woman called Lee Robbins, and what she found upended what everyone believed about addiction. When the soldiers who had used heroin in Vietnam returned home, only 5% of them became re-addicted within a year. Approximately 9 out of 10 who had been using heroin in Vietnam simply stopped when they got back. 9 out of 10 off heroin without treatment. That finding was so contrary to the accepted model that it was widely disbelieved at the time. Because the accepted model said addiction lives in the chemistry and in the person. So what actually happened? They changed environment, completely and totally. In Vietnam, these men were surrounded by the cues, the stress, the danger, the friends who used, the easy availability, the distance from home. Come back to America and every single one of those cues is gone. Different house, different people, different smells, different pressures. The habit had been welded to a context, and the context ceased to exist. And Clear puts the contrast beside the standard picture of addiction recovery. Someone who develops a habit at home goes to a clinic, gets clean in an environment stripped of triggers, and then returns to the exact neighborhood the same friends, the same kitchen, the same chair. It's not surprising that relapse rates are high. Everything in the environment is still calling. So the chapters claim, it is easier to change your habits by changing your context than by changing yourself. Which brings us to the thing that everybody believes and Clear says is largely wrong. Disciplined people are not better at resisting temptation. They are better at avoiding it. He's blunt about it. People with high self-control tend to spend less time in tempting situations. Not more time resisting, less time exposed. And when you think about the people you know who seem to have iron discipline, this rings true in a way the willpower story never quite does. They don't have a superhuman ability to say no to a drink at 11 p.m. They're not in the bar at 11 p.m. Which produces the practical rule of the inverted first law. To break a bad habit, make the cue invisible. If you can't do the work with your phone in the room, put the phone in another room. If you can't stop watching television, take the batteries out of the remote and put them in a drawer. If you keep buying things you don't need, unsubscribe from the emails. And Clear makes the sharper point about why this is more effective than resisting. Self-control is a short-term strategy, not a long-term one. You can resist once, you can resist twice, but every time the cue fires, it costs you something, and you have to keep paying, forever, at unpredictable intervals, often when you are tired. Remove the cue and the cost goes to zero permanently. Which reframes the whole thing. Trying to resist temptation over and over is not the disciplined approach, it's the expensive approach. And here's the part I find genuinely relieving. Clear says, once a habit is formed, it is unlikely to be forgotten. That's uncomfortable, the loop stays in there. But it means the strategy of eliminate the cue isn't a failure to conquer something. It's the correct response to a permanent feature of how brains work. You are not going to delete the habit. You can starve it of triggers. Now, my honest note, and this chapter needs a careful one. The Vietnam finding is real and important, and it's also been carried much further than the data supports. Robbins herself was cautious about it. Those soldiers had things going for them beyond a change of scenery. They were returning to families, to jobs, to a country with structure, and heroin was suddenly illegal and hard to get rather than cheap and everywhere. Environment, there, means the entire architecture of a life, not the arrangement of a room. Using it to argue, just change your context, for someone with an addiction today is a serious overreach, and I want to say that plainly. If that's your situation, this is a book about habits, and addiction is not simply a strong habit. Get proper help. For ordinary habits, the phone, the biscuits, the second drink, the doom scroll, the mechanism holds up very well, and it's the most cost-effective idea in the first law. So, the question. Name the thing you keep resisting, the one where you're proud of yourself on the days you win. Now, how many times a week does that fight actually happen? Because if it's daily, you're paying a tax every day, and you'll lose eventually, not because you're weak, but because you have to win every time, and it only has to win once. So the real question isn't how to be stronger, it's what would have to change so the fight doesn't start. And usually, the answer is embarrassingly physical. A different route home, a drawer, a different room to charge a phone in. Which is where the first law ends, and Chapter 8 begins the second law, make it attractive, with the most uncomfortable idea so far, that the reason you want things has almost nothing to do with the things themselves. Chapter 8. How to make a habit irresistible. This is the second law. Make it attractive. So in the 1940s, a Dutch scientist called Nico Tinbergen is on a beach studying herring gulls, and he notices something about the babies. An adult herring gull has a small red dot on its beak, And when a chick is hungry, it pecks at that red dot, and the parent regurgitates food. Simple system. So Tinbergen made a fake beak out of cardboard with a red dot on it. No gull attached, just cardboard. The chicks pecked at it immediately. Then he got curious. He made the red dot bigger. The chicks pecked faster. And then he did the thing that makes this famous. He built a wooden stick. Not a beak at all, just a stick, with 3 red dots painted on it. And the chicks went berserk. They ignored their own mothers. They pecked frantically at a wooden stick with 3 red spots, as though it were the most compelling parent that had ever existed. Tinbergen found the same thing elsewhere. Geese will roll any round object near their nest back underneath them to incubate it, including a volleyball or a light bulb or a Christmas tree ornament, and they'll prefer the bigger one to their own egg. These exaggerated cues are called supernormal stimuli, a version of reality more intense than reality, which the animal cannot help but respond to. And here's why that's in a habits book. We are the animals now. Junk food is a supernormal stimulus. Nothing in nature has that ratio of salt, fat, and sugar. It has been engineered, deliberately, expensively by food scientists, to be more compelling than any food our ancestors could have found. Pornography is a supernormal stimulus. Social media is a supernormal stimulus, a feed with more novelty, more social approval, and more outrage per minute than any village could produce in a year. You are pecking at a stick with 3 red dots on it. You've been doing it all day. That's the setup, and now the mechanism, which is the most misunderstood thing in modern psychology. Dopamine. Everyone calls it the pleasure chemical. It isn't quite. Clear walks through the research, including the famous experiments by Olds and Milner, where rats with the dopamine circuit disabled lost all will to act, even to eat, and starved within a day while sitting beside food. They still appeared to enjoy the food when it was placed in their mouths. They just had no drive to go and get it. So dopamine isn't the reward. Dopamine is the wanting. And here's the finding that matters most for habits. Dopamine spikes when you anticipate the reward, not when you receive it. Measure it in the brain, and the peak arrives before the thing happens, before the food, before the message is read, before the cigarette is lit. This is why the moments before a habit are often more charged than the habit itself. It's why the anticipation of a holiday is frequently better than the holiday. It's why scrolling is compelling, even though almost nothing you see is any good. You're not being rewarded by the content, you're being driven by the possibility of it. Clear's line, it is the anticipation of a reward, not the fulfillment of it, that gets us to take action. Which means the second law, make it attractive, is really increase the anticipation. The more attractive an opportunity is, the more likely it is to become habit-forming. So what do you actually do with that? The main tool is temptation bundling, and it comes from a study by a researcher called Catherine Milkman at the University of Pennsylvania. The idea? Pair an action you want to do with an action you need to do. Milkman's version was audiobooks and the gym. Participants could only listen to a gripping audiobook while exercising. Attendance went up substantially because the thing they wanted became available only inside the thing they were avoiding. Clear tells the story of an engineer called Ronan Byrne, who wired an exercise bike to his laptop so that Netflix would only play while he was pedaling above a certain speed. If he slowed down, the show paused. That's the shape. Only do the thing you love while doing the thing you avoid. And you can stack it onto habit stacking from Chapter 5, which gives you a genuinely powerful formula. After current habit, I will habit I need. After habit I need, I will habit I want. After I make my morning coffee, I will write for 20 minutes. After I write for 20 minutes, I'll check the news. Now the pleasant thing is a consequence of the necessary thing, rather than a competitor to it. Now, my honest note, and this one matters. Temptation bundling is real, and it's well evidenced, and it is also the tactic in this book with the shortest half-life in my experience. It works beautifully for a few weeks, and then a slightly awkward thing happens. You start resenting the pairing, or you quietly stop enforcing it, because there is nothing stopping you from just watching the show. The bundle is only as strong as your willingness to enforce it, which is the willpower this book keeps telling us not to rely on. The Netflix bike works because it's a physical constraint, not an agreement with yourself. That's the difference, and it's worth noticing. The bundles that survive are the ones where the enforcement is built into the machinery, not into your character. And on dopamine, the science here is broadly right, but the popular version is a mess, and Clear is more careful than most. Just be wary of anyone using dopamine as an explanation for everything. It's a neurotransmitter with many roles, not a moral force. So, the question: what's the thing you want to do that you always find time for? The show, the game, the scroll, the football. You never have to schedule that, do you? It just happens. Now, what's the thing you need to do that never happens? And the real question: could the first one be made to depend on the second? Not by promising yourself, by arranging it so that it physically, actually does. Because a promise to yourself is a stick with one red dot on it, and you're up against 3. Which brings us to Chapter 9, and the single strongest force acting on your habits. Stronger than dopamine, stronger than environment. It's the people around you, and it starts with a Hungarian man who wrote letters looking for a wife so he could conduct an experiment on his own children. Chapter 9. The Role of Family and Friends in Shaping Your Habits. So in 1965, a Hungarian man called Laszlo Polgár writes a series of very strange letters to a woman he has never met. He has a theory. He believes genius is made, not born. That with the right training, from early enough, any healthy child could be raised to be exceptional at something, and he wants to test it, properly, with his own children. He needs a wife who'll agree to the experiment. He found one. Her name was Clara, and she agreed, and they had 3 daughters, Susan, Sophia, and Judith, and they raised them inside a house that was, in effect, a chess laboratory. Chess books everywhere, chess pictures of famous players on the walls, chess from the youngest ages, constantly, as the normal condition of family life. The result? Susan became the first woman to earn the Grand Master title. Sophia became an international master. Judith became, at 15, the youngest Grand Master in history at the time, and was, for decades, considered the greatest female chess player who ever lived. Now you can argue about the ethics of that experiment all day, and people have, but Clear's point isn't about parenting. It's this. The Polgár sisters grew up in a culture where chess was simply what people did. Not a discipline they had to summon motivation for, the normal thing, the ordinary activity of the household. And that is the most powerful force acting on your habits. And it isn't dopamine or environment design. It's what looks normal to the people around you. Clear grounds this in something old and quite serious. For most of human history, our ancestors lived in tribes, and becoming separated from the tribe, or worse, cast out, was a death sentence. So we are descended, overwhelmingly, from people for whom fitting in was a survival trait. One of the deepest human desires is to belong, and that preference is not a weakness you can reason your way out of, it's standard equipment, which produces the line that runs the chapter. We don't choose our earliest habits, we imitate them. And Clear says we imitate 3 groups in particular. 1. The close. The people physically nearest you, family, friends, colleagues. He cites the finding that if your friend becomes obese, your own risk of becoming obese rises substantially, and the effect travels through the network. The blunt version? One of the most effective things you can do to build better habits is to join a culture where your desired behaviour is the normal behaviour. That's a genuinely strong instruction, and notice how it differs from everything else in the book. It doesn't ask you to design anything, it asks you to go somewhere. And there's a second order benefit. In that culture, the behaviour stops requiring motivation and starts being shared. You get the habit and the belonging in the same move. 2. The many. This is the Solomon Asch conformity experiments, which are worth knowing if you don't already. A subject is put in a room with several other people, all secretly working for the experimenter, and shown a card with a line on it, then asked which of 3 other lines matches its length. The answer is obvious. Children can do it. The actors all give the same wrong answer, out loud, one by one, and then it's the subject's turn. And a substantial proportion of people give the answer they know is wrong, not because they're fooled, many of them could see perfectly well, but because being the only one is unbearable. Clear's takeaway: whenever we are unsure how to act, we look to the group to guide our behaviour, and the normal behaviour of the tribe often overpowers the desired behaviour of the individual. Most days, we'd rather be wrong with the crowd than right by ourselves. 3. The powerful. We imitate people we admire and envy, those with status, those who seem to have what we want. This is why aspirational advertising works, and why a habit becomes attractive when it's associated with someone we'd like to be. So the practical version of the second law that comes out of all this is: join a culture where your desired behaviour is the normal behaviour, and where you already have something in common with the group. That last clause matters. Shared identity makes the culture stick. A running club where everyone is like you in some other respect will hold you far better than a room of strangers who happen to run. Now, the inversion for breaking habits. If normality drives behaviour, then the fastest way to make a bad habit unattractive is to move into a culture where it isn't normal, and the fastest way to fail is to try to hold a new habit inside a group where it makes you the odd one out. That is a fight you will have to win daily, in public, against people you like. Now, my honest note, and this is the chapter where I part company with the book slightly, join a culture where the behaviour is normal is the best advice in it and the hardest to actually take, and Clear doesn't quite acknowledge how hard. You cannot choose your family. Often you can't choose your colleagues. Changing your friends is a serious, sometimes painful act, and telling someone their social circle is the obstacle is a much bigger ask than telling them to put their trainers by the door. There's also a colder implication he leaves alone. If proximity is that powerful, then a lot of what looks like personal failure is really just where you happen to be standing. That cuts both ways. It should make you far less smug about your good habits and far more forgiving about other people's bad ones. Which, if you've watched the other episodes on this channel, is Housel's Chapter 1 arriving from a completely different direction. Nobody's crazy, everybody's standing somewhere you've never stood. So, the question, and it's an uncomfortable one, so I'll say it plainly, think about the habit you most want to build. Now think about the 5 people you spend the most time with. For how many of them is that habit normal? Not admired, not encouraged, normal. The unremarkable thing they simply do. If the answer is none, you are not fighting your willpower. You are fighting the gravity of a tribe, and you will lose most rounds of that fight regardless of how much you want it. And that doesn't mean leave your friends. It might just mean find one room once a week where the thing you want to be is the ordinary way to be. Which leads into Chapter 10, the last of the second law, where Clear takes on the hardest question in the whole book. How do you make yourself want something you currently find unpleasant? Chapter 10. How to find and fix the causes of your bad habits. So here's a question that sounds simple and isn't. Why do you actually want the things you want? And Clear goes underneath it in a way I found genuinely clarifying. Every craving, he says, is a surface level expression of a deeper underlying motive. The specific thing you want is learned. The motive underneath it is not. Take the obvious one. You don't have a fundamental desire to smoke a cigarette or scroll a feed. What you have is an underlying motive. Reduce uncertainty, conserve energy, obtain status, connect and bond with others, reduce anxiety. Those are old. They're the same for every human who has ever lived. And what changes across cultures and centuries is only which behaviour got attached to which motive. So, your ancestors reduced anxiety by sitting round a fire with the tribe. You reduce it by opening an app. Same underlying motive, wildly different surface habit. Your habits are modern-day solutions to ancient desires. Which means, and this is the useful bit, a craving is not really about the thing. A craving is about a feeling you want to change. Clear's version. You don't want to smoke a cigarette, you want relief. You don't want to turn on the television, you want to be entertained. Every habit is a solution to some problem, and if you don't know the problem, you'll never successfully swap the solution. Now, that's the diagnosis. The rest of the chapter is what to do about it, and it comes down to one move. Reframe your habits to highlight their benefits rather than their drawbacks. Clear points at Alan Carr's famous method for quitting smoking, which works by systematically reframing every cue. You're not giving up anything because smoking gives you nothing. You don't need a cigarette to relax. You don't need one to be sociable. By the end, smoking looks like the least appealing thing in the world. And crucially, the smoker hasn't been told to resist. Their prediction about the reward has been changed. Because that's the mechanism. You can make hard habits more attractive if you can learn to associate them with a positive experience. And the small version of this that I use, and that I think is the most immediately usable sentence in the chapter, is a one-word swap. We spend our days saying, have to. I have to get up early. I have to make another sales call. I have to cook dinner for my family. I have to go to the gym. Change it to get to. I get to get up early. I get to make another sales call for my business. I get to cook dinner for my family. Now, said flatly like that, it sounds like a fridge magnet, and I want to defend it slightly better than that, because there's something real underneath. Have to frames the action as a cost imposed on you by someone else. Get to frames it as an opportunity you have. And the second one is, quite often, literally more accurate. You get to make a sales call because you have a business, which many people don't. You get to cook dinner because you have a family to cook for. Clear gives an example I think about a lot. An athlete who reframes the nerves before competition. Instead of, I'm nervous, which reads as a warning, I'm excited. Because the physiological state is nearly identical, and what differs is the story you put on it. And there's decent evidence that this particular reappraisal actually works. And the sharpest version he gives comes from a man in a wheelchair, whose framing was, I don't have to do this, I get to. Because the alternative to having to exercise is not being able to. Then the second tool, and this one is more mechanical, the motivation ritual. The idea is to associate your habit with something you already enjoy, and use that as the starting cue. Do something you love immediately before a difficult habit, every time, and eventually the little ritual itself becomes the trigger for getting into the right state. Clear mentions a comedian who kisses his hands before going on stage. Athletes have their pre-match sequences. A writer might play the same piece of music before every session, not because the music helps, but because after 50 repetitions, the music means writing, and the brain shifts on cue. You're building a switch you can flip, rather than waiting to feel a certain way. Now, my honest note, and this is the chapter I'm most sceptical of in the whole book. Reframing works. It is well evidenced for arousal reappraisal, nervous into excited, and that's a genuine finding. But have to into get to is doing something much larger, and it can slide into a place I don't like. Applied to a task you've chosen, it's a healthy correction. Applied to a job that is genuinely grinding you down, or care work you never volunteered for, or a situation you can't leave, you get to do this, stops being a reframe and becomes a way of telling someone their exhaustion is an attitude problem. Some things are in fact a burden. Calling a burden a privilege doesn't lighten it, it just makes it harder to say out loud that it's heavy. So my version of this tool comes with a filter. Use it on the things you chose. Be very careful using it on the things you didn't, and be extremely careful using it on someone else. That's not a rejection of the chapter, it's the boundary the chapter doesn't draw. So, the question. Take the bad habit you named earlier, and this time don't ask what it is or when it happens. Ask, what feeling does it fix? Not what it gives you, what it removes. Boredom, loneliness, dread about a specific task, the low hum of being behind on something. Because whatever that feeling is, that's the actual habit. The behaviour is just a current delivery mechanism, and you will not get rid of it by attacking the delivery mechanism while the feeling is still there. You'll just find another one. Most people do. That's what "I quit but then I started eating" is. So the real question is the one underneath. What else could fix that feeling that you'd actually be willing to do? Which brings us to the third law and chapter 11, where the book stops being about wanting things and starts being about the single most underrated variable in behaviour change. How many times you've done it. Chapter 11. Walk slowly, but never backward. This is the third law. Make it easy. So on the first day of class, a photography professor at the University of Florida called Jerry Ullsman does something odd. He divides the room down the middle. Everyone on the left is now the quantity group. They will be graded purely on how much work they produce. 100 photos submitted gets an A, 90 gets a B, 80 a C. He doesn't care what's in them. He'll count. Everyone on the right is the quality group. They will be graded on excellence. They only need to produce one photograph for the entire semester, but to get an A, it has to be very nearly perfect. End of term. He looks at the work, and every single one of the best photographs was produced by the quantity group. Which sounds backwards until you picture the semester. The quantity students spent the whole term shooting, trying compositions, testing light, making mistakes in the darkroom, learning what didn't work, adjusting, shooting again. Hundreds of photographs. The quality students spent the term theorising about perfection. They speculated about what an excellent photograph would be. They planned. And at the end, they had one mediocre photo and a lot of unverified opinions. That's the chapter. And it's the correction to something almost everyone gets wrong. We are obsessed with the best approach, and the best approach is worth much less than we think next to simply starting. Clear splits this into two words that I think are worth keeping: motion and action. Motion is planning, strategizing, learning. It feels productive, it genuinely does, but it produces no outcome. Researching the best diet is motion. Outlining 20 ideas for the article is motion. Reading the book about habits is, I'm sorry to say, motion. Action is the behaviour that delivers the result. Eating the meal, writing a sentence, doing the workout. And here's why we prefer motion, and it's a genuinely uncomfortable observation. Motion allows us to feel like we're making progress without risking failure. You cannot fail at planning. Nobody can criticise an outline. The moment you act, the thing exists, and it can be bad, and it can be judged, and you can be judged. So we stay in motion, and we call it preparation, and it can absorb years. Clear's line, if you want to master a habit, the key is to start with repetition, not perfection. Now, the mechanism underneath, because this isn't just a pep talk. Habits form based on frequency, not time. That is a genuine correction to something you've probably heard. The famous 21 days to form a habit figure is essentially folklore. It traces back to a plastic surgeon's observation about patients adjusting to their new faces, not to a study of habit formation. What actually happens is that each repetition strengthens a neural pathway. Clear describes the automaticity curve. Plot a behaviour's automaticity against the number of repetitions, and you get a curve that climbs steeply at first and then flattens as the behaviour becomes automatic. The horizontal axis is repetitions, not days, which reframes the goal completely. You are not waiting out a period of time, you are accumulating a count. And that changes what you should optimise for. Not the perfect session, but the next repetition. A short, bad workout that happened beats a perfect one that didn't, because only one of them moved you along the curve. There's a neat consequence of this for anyone who's ever tried to restart something. If habits form by repetition, then the reps you did before still exist. You're not back at zero, you're at whatever count you reached, minus a bit of rust, which is a much more accurate and much less demoralising way to look at starting again. Now, my honest note. The Ullsman photography story is the most repeated anecdote in productivity writing, and it deserves a small caveat. It's an anecdote. It's usually told without a citation to a published study, and the details vary depending on who's telling it. The principle that iteration beats theorising is well supported elsewhere, in deliberate practice research and in basic skill acquisition. But treat the story as an illustration, not as evidence. And there's a limit to quantity over quality that Clear touches lightly and I'd press harder. Repetition builds automaticity. It does not, by itself, build skill. You can do a thing badly 10,000 times and get very good at doing it badly. The photography students weren't only shooting, they were shooting, seeing the result, and adjusting. Take the feedback loop out and volume stops working. So the honest version is, repetition beats planning, provided you're looking at the results. So the question, and I think this is the most personally useful one in the book so far, what are you currently in motion on? The course you're researching rather than the thing you'd be doing. The plan for the business rather than the first customer. The perfect training program rather than a walk. You'll know because it's the thing you can talk about fluently and have no output for. And then the follow-up, which is the whole third law compressed. What is the smallest version of the actual action that you could complete today? Not the good version, the one that would count as a repetition. Because the photography students who got the A's weren't better, they just had 99 more attempts than the people who were trying to get it right. Which leads into chapter 12, where Clear explains why we keep choosing the easy thing even when we know better, and argues that instead of fighting that, you should build your entire system around it. Chapter 12. The Law of Least Effort. So this one starts with a question about continents, which sounds like a detour and isn't. Why did agriculture spread so much faster across Europe and Asia than it did across the Americas or Africa? Jared Diamond's answer, which Clear borrows, is that it comes down to shape. Look at a world map. Europe and Asia sprawl mostly east to west, a wide horizontal band. The Americas and Africa are stretched mostly north to south. And that matters because places at the same latitude share climate. Same day length, same seasons, same rainfall patterns. Roughly the same soil behaviour. So a crop domesticated in one part of Eurasia could be carried thousands of miles east or west and still grow. Move a crop north or south, though, and everything changes, and it dies. Agriculture in the Americas spread at a fraction of the rate, not because the people were less capable, but because the terrain resisted. Clear's conclusion, the spread of agriculture across thousands of years was constrained by the amount of friction in the environment. And that's the law of the chapter applied to you. Human behaviour follows the law of least effort. Given two similar options, people will naturally gravitate toward the one that requires the least amount of work. Now, I want to be careful, because this is easy to hear as an insult, and Clear doesn't mean it that way. It's not laziness in the moral sense, it's conservation. Energy is precious, and brains are built to hoard it. Every action requires a certain amount, and the more it requires, the less likely it is to happen. Which means the amount of energy required is the real currency of behavior change, not the amount of desire. And here's the practical inversion that follows, which is the most underused idea in the book. Make it easy to do the things you want, and difficult to do the things you don't. Not want it more, reduce the number of steps. Clear frames it as addition by subtraction. Most of us try to build habits by adding motivation on top of friction. He suggests going after the friction instead. The same amount of behavior for less energy, achieved by removing steps rather than summoning force. Some concrete versions. Want to go to the gym? Choose one on your commute rather than one that's better but requires a detour. That sounds trivially obvious, and it's exactly the decision people get wrong, because they optimize the gym rather than the path to the gym. Want to eat better? Chop the vegetables at the weekend, so on a Tuesday night, cook properly is 3 steps rather than 11. Want to write in the morning? Leave the document open on the screen overnight. When you sit down, there's nothing between you and the first sentence. And the inversion, for bad habits, increase the friction. Clear tells of someone who wanted to stop watching so much television and simply unplugged it and took the batteries out of the remote after each use. It took only about 10 seconds to undo, but 10 seconds was enough that, shall I watch television, became a decision rather than a reflex, and the amount of television collapsed. That's the general shape. You don't need enormous barriers. You need enough friction to convert an automatic behavior back into a conscious choice. 10 seconds is often plenty, because a habit runs on being unexamined. Then there's the bigger version, which he calls priming the environment, and it's the household level application of Chapter 6. Prime it for the next use. When you finish cooking, reset the kitchen so it's ready to cook in. Lay your gym clothes out the night before. Put the book on the pillow. Every one of those moves the effort from the moment you'll be weak to a moment when you're not. And then he makes a point I find genuinely clever. The difference between a good day and a bad day is often a handful of small choices at what he calls decisive moments. The moment you decide whether to take the car or the bike. The moment you walk into the kitchen and choose the cupboard or the fridge. The moment after work when you either change into gym clothes or sit down. Each of those takes a second or two, and each one commits you to an entire block of behavior that follows automatically. 2 minutes of decision determines the next 3 hours. So the leverage isn't spread evenly across the day. It's concentrated in a few forks. And if you can identify yours, you can put your effort where it actually does something. Now, my honest note. The diamond material is contested. Guns, Germs and Steel is a famous book, and its geographic determinism argument has taken serious criticism from historians and anthropologists who think it flattens an enormous amount of human agency and complexity. Clear uses it as an analogy rather than a claim, and as an analogy, it's vivid. But I wouldn't want you leaving with the impression that continental shape is settled science for why history went the way it did. The behavioral point stands entirely on its own, and it's better evidence than the analogy. Reducing friction changes behavior far more reliably than increasing motivation. The cafeteria study in Chapter 6 is that same finding with numbers attached. And a limit worth naming: friction reduction has a floor. You can make a habit almost effortless and still not do it, if the thing itself is something you don't want or that conflicts with your identity. Easy is a multiplier on wanting, not a substitute for it. This chapter is at its best on habits you genuinely want and keep failing to start, and at its weakest on habits you've been told you should want. So, the question. Think about the habit you want and count the steps. Literally count them. From where you are right now, physically, to the moment the behavior is happening. How many separate actions? Then ask the only question that matters here. Which of those steps could you delete tonight in under 5 minutes? Not all of them. 1. Because friction is the thing you can change today without becoming a better person first. And that leads directly into chapter 13, which takes this to its logical extreme. The rule that says a habit should take less than 2 minutes to do, and which sounds like a gimmick until you understand what it's actually for. Chapter 13. How to stop procrastinating by using the 2-minute rule. So, the choreographer Twyla Tharp has a morning ritual, and when she describes it, she says something that took me a moment to catch. She wakes at 5:30, puts on her workout clothes, walks outside, hails a taxi, and tells the driver to take her to the gym, where she works out for 2 hours. And then she says, the ritual is not the stretching and the weight training. The ritual is the cab. The moment I tell the driver where to go, I have completed the ritual. Read that again, because it's the whole chapter. The habit isn't the 2-hour workout. The habit is getting in the taxi. Everything after that is automatic. Once you are in a cab heading to the gym at 5:40 in the morning, you are going to work out. There is no realistic version where you don't. So the thing she has actually made habitual is tiny, and it's positioned at the exact point where the decision gets made. Clear's version is the same shape. His ritual isn't the workout, it's changing into his workout clothes. If he changes clothes, the rest happens. And that's what he builds into the 2-minute rule. When you start a new habit, it should take less than 2 minutes to do. Read 30 books a year becomes read 1 page. Do yoga 4 days a week becomes take out my yoga mat. Run 3 miles becomes tie my running shoes. Study for class becomes open my notes. Now, the objection everybody has, and it's the right objection. Reading 1 page is not reading. Tying your shoes is not running. What's the point? 2 points, and they're different. The first is that you have to standardize before you can optimize. You cannot improve a habit that doesn't exist. The 2-minute version isn't the goal, it's the entry point, and its job is to make the behavior reliably happen at all. Once it's reliable, you can extend it. The second, and this is the one that does the real work, 2 minutes is where the decisive moment lives. Almost nobody fails a habit in the middle. People don't stop reading on page 40, they fail at the threshold, the 2 minutes between not doing it and doing it. That's the friction point. So you put all your engineering there and you make that specific gap as small as you possibly can. Clear calls this the gateway habit, a small action that naturally leads down a more productive path. Get out the mat and you'll probably do some yoga. Open the document and you'll probably write a line. And when you don't, when you genuinely do get out the mat and then put it away, the rule still worked. You cast a vote. Chapter 2. Every action is a vote for the type of person you wish to become, and a 2-minute vote counts the same as a 2-hour one on the tally. That's the connection people miss. The 2-minute rule is not a productivity trick, it's an identity tactic. It's the cheapest possible way to accumulate evidence about who you are. Then there's the extension, which is habit shaping. Once the 2-minute version is automatic, you graduate to a slightly harder one and repeat. Become a reader. Read 1 page, read for 5 minutes, read a chapter, read a book a month. Each stage is only entered once the previous one is genuinely effortless. Clear's framing is that you're not trying to do one thing, you're trying to master the habit of showing up. And the sharpest sentence in the chapter is this: a habit must be established before it can be improved. Now, the trap, and Clear names it, which I appreciate, because a lot of people using this rule are using it wrong. The 2-minute rule is not a Trojan horse. It's tempting to think, I'll say 1 page, but secretly I intend to read 50, and then judge yourself for stopping at 1. That corrupts the whole thing, because now the 2-minute version is a failure state rather than a success state, and you've reintroduced exactly the pressure the rule exists to remove. If you can only genuinely commit to 2 minutes, do 2 minutes and count it as a win. That's the deal. Now, my honest note, and this is a real limitation. The 2-minute rule is superb for habits that are continuous and self-extending: reading, writing, exercise, tidying. You start, and momentum does some of the work. It's much weaker for habits that are discrete and effortful with no natural continuation. 2 minutes of learning a language is genuinely 2 minutes. 2 minutes of a difficult conversation is not a gateway to anything. Some things don't have a small version that leads anywhere, and pretending they do just produces a lot of 2-minute sessions and no progress.
And there's a subtler failure I've seen in myself. The 2-minute version can become a way of discharging the obligation. You open the notes, feel briefly virtuous, close them, and the guilt that would otherwise have driven a real session has been paid off cheaply. The rule is supposed to be a doorway, and it can become an exit. The test I'd apply? After a month, is the 2-minute version growing on its own? If yes, it's working exactly as designed. If it has been stubbornly 2 minutes for 4 weeks and shows no sign of extending, the rule isn't the problem. Something upstream is, and it's probably Chapter 10's question about what feeling the avoidance is fixing. So, the question. Take the habit you keep failing to start. Now find its taxi. Not the habit, the single physical action taking under 2 minutes that once completed makes the rest nearly inevitable. For the gym, it's usually changing clothes, not arriving. For writing, it's usually opening the file, not having an idea. For an early start, it's usually putting the alarm across the room the night before. And here's the test of whether you've found the right one. Once you've done it, does refusing to continue feel stranger than continuing? If yes, that's your taxi. Build the entire habit around getting into it, and stop trying to build the habit around the 2 hours at the other end. Which leads to Chapter 14, and the last piece of the 3rd law, where Clear stops making good habits easy and starts making bad ones structurally impossible, starting with a novelist who beat a deadline by having his own clothes locked away. Chapter 14. How to make good habits inevitable and bad habits impossible. So in the summer of 1830, Victor Hugo is in trouble. He'd agreed to write a book 12 months earlier, and in those 12 months he had done essentially nothing. He'd thrown parties, he'd taken on other projects, he'd delayed. His publisher, understandably fed up, set a hard deadline. Less than 6 months, or no book. And Hugo's solution was not to find discipline. It was this. He collected all of his clothes, gave them to an assistant, and had them locked away. He kept one large shawl. He now had nothing appropriate to wear outside. He couldn't go to a party. He couldn't take a meeting. He couldn't leave. He wrote furiously through the autumn and winter, and The Hunchback of Notre Dame was published 2 weeks early. Now, notice what Hugo actually did there, because it isn't willpower and it isn't motivation. He made a decision once, in a moment when he was thinking clearly, that removed the choice from all the moments when he wouldn't be. Psychologists call it a commitment device, a choice you make in the present that controls your actions in the future. And Clear's point is that this is the highest leverage form of behaviour change available, because it only requires you to be strong once. Everything else in this book asks you to have arranged things well. A commitment device asks you to arrange things well one time and then removes your ability to unarrange them. Some examples, and they range from mild to slightly extreme. Buying food in individual packets rather than in bulk, so the portion is decided before you're hungry. Setting up an automatic transfer to savings on payday, so the money is gone before you can consider it. Asking to be removed from the mailing list. Cutting up the card. Deleting the app and not knowing the password. The common structure: you're making the bad habit harder in a way you cannot easily undo in the moment. Because that's the whole trick. Chapter 12 said, add friction. 10 seconds is often enough. A commitment device is the version where you can't remove the friction yourself, even if you want to. And you will want to. Then Clear moves to the version I find most interesting, and it's a distinction worth carrying around. One-time actions that lock in future habits. Most habits require ongoing effort, but some decisions are single actions with permanent returns. Buy a good mattress once, better sleep for years. Get blackout curtains once. Unsubscribe from the marketing emails once. Set up automatic bill payments once. Buy a water filter once. Get a smaller plate once. Take the television out of the bedroom once. Clear's framing: these aren't habits at all. They're single decisions that pay a dividend forever, and they are absurdly underrated relative to how much effort people put into daily discipline. I'd go further. If you have limited energy for self-improvement, and everyone does, the highest return on it is almost certainly not another habit. It's finding the 3 or 4 one-time actions that permanently change the terrain. And the ultimate form of this, Clear says, is automation, using technology to take the behaviour out of your hands entirely. Automatic pension contributions, a subscription that delivers the thing you'd otherwise forget to buy, a website blocker that runs on a schedule you set weeks ago. He talks about apps that lock you out of social media during set hours. The principle: technology is the most reliable and effective way to guarantee correct behaviour, because it changes the default from requires you to happens unless you intervene. And defaults are enormously powerful. Whatever the default is, most people do it. That's why opt-out organ donation schemes have vastly higher rates than opt-in ones in countries whose populations are otherwise very similar. So the strategy of this whole chapter compresses to one line. Stop trying to be the kind of person who resists and become the kind of person who has already decided. Now, my honest note, and it's a caution. Commitment devices work, and they can be taken too far. There's a version of this where someone builds an increasingly elaborate cage around themselves. Blockers on blockers, locked cupboards, apps to police the apps. And the underlying thing never gets addressed. If you need 6 commitment devices to stop doing something, the honest question isn't, what's the 7th device? It's Chapter 10's question. What feeling is this fixing, and why is it so strong? The other limit is that commitment devices are much easier to build when your life has slack in it. Hugo could have his clothes locked away because he had an assistant, an income, and no obligation to go anywhere. Automating your savings requires a surplus to automate. Deleting an app you need for work isn't available to you. That doesn't invalidate the tool. It does mean the number of devices available to you is a function of circumstance, not just cleverness. And it's worth saying, because the book generally addresses a reader with a lot of control over their own day. So, the question, and this is the one I'd genuinely act on if you take nothing else from the third law. Forget habits for a second. What is the single one-time action you could take this week that would quietly improve the next year? The automatic transfer, the blackout curtain, the app deleted from the phone but kept on the laptop, the alarm clock that isn't your phone, the direct debit to the thing you keep meaning to fund. You've probably known what it is for months. It costs one afternoon and it never asks you for anything again. And it will outperform any amount of trying harder because it doesn't rely on you being the person you're hoping to become. It works on the person you are on a bad Tuesday, which is, in the end, the only person any of this has to work for. Which closes the third law, and chapter 15 opens the fourth and final one, with the question this book has been circling from the beginning. Why do we so reliably do the thing that feels good now, even when we can see exactly what it costs later? Chapter 15. The Cardinal Rule of Behavior Change. This is the fourth law. Make it satisfying. So, in the late 1990s, a public health worker called Stephen Luby leaves Omaha, Nebraska and buys a one-way ticket to Karachi. Karachi at that point had over 9 million people, and more than 60% of them were living in squatter settlements and slums, dense, underserviced, with poor sanitation. Diarrhea, pneumonia, and other preventable illnesses were killing children at a rate that is difficult to sit with. And the solution, medically, was not complicated. It was hand washing with soap. Here's the thing though, and it's the reason this story is in a habits book rather than a public health one. The people of Karachi already knew that hand washing was important. This was not an education problem. Nobody needed convincing. They knew, and it didn't happen. Because knowing has never been the mechanism. So Luby's team partnered with Procter & Gamble, and they did something that sounds almost too small. They supplied a premium soap. Free. Not ordinary soap, soap that lathered easily, smelled good, and felt luxurious on the skin. And hand washing became a genuinely pleasant experience. It went from a chore you'd been told to do to something that felt nice while you were doing it. The results were extraordinary. Within a year, diarrhea among children fell by 52%, pneumonia by roughly half, and impetigo, a bacterial skin infection, by around a third. And the effect persisted. Years later, over 95% of households that had been given the free soap had washing facilities with soap and water present, even though the free supply had long since stopped. They didn't change the knowledge. They changed how the behaviour felt in the moment. And that's the fourth law. What is immediately rewarded is repeated. What is immediately punished is avoided. Clear calls it the Cardinal Rule of Behaviour Change, and once you see it, a great deal of human failure becomes legible. Because here's the structural problem with almost every habit you're trying to build. We evolved in what Clear calls an immediate return environment. For most of human history, actions had immediate consequences. You found food and ate it. You saw a threat and ran. You were cold and you built a fire. There was very little delayed anything. We now live in a delayed return environment. You work now for money in a month. You save now for a retirement in 40 years. You exercise now for a body in a year. Almost everything that matters pays out on a timescale our instincts were never built for. And your brain, which is essentially unchanged, keeps prioritizing the immediate, which produces the mismatch that explains nearly all of it. With bad habits, the immediate outcome feels good and the ultimate outcome feels bad. With good habits, it's exactly reversed. The cigarette is pleasant now and lethal later. The workout is unpleasant now and valuable later. The junk food is delicious now. The savings are boring now. Clear's line, and it's the cleanest statement of the human condition I've read in a self-help book. The costs of your good habits are in the present. The costs of your bad habits are in the future. So how do you fix a mismatch that's built into your nervous system? You can't change the payout schedule of reality. What you can do is add a small immediate reward to the behaviours that only pay later. That's the practical instruction. Make it satisfying. Attach something immediately pleasurable to the habit whose real reward is delayed. And Clear's version of this is more thoughtful than treat yourself, because the obvious approach backfires. If your reward for going to the gym is a large slice of cake, you have just built a system that pulls against itself. So the rule is, the reward must reinforce the identity you're building, not contradict it. His favourite version is a form of it that I've actually adopted, and it's satisfying in a way that surprised me. Put money into something you want every time you do the habit. Do the workout, transfer £5 to a new leather jacket fund. Skip the takeaway, move the money you would have spent into savings, and watch it grow. Now the immediate reward and the long-term goal point the same way, and the growing number is itself the pleasant feeling. And for habits of avoidance, where the success is that nothing happened, this matters even more, because nothing happening is not a reward. If you're trying not to buy something, moving the unspent money somewhere visible turns an absence into a visible gain. You've made abstinence produce evidence. Now, my honest note, and this chapter has one that I think is quite serious. The Karachi study is genuinely good evidence, and it's often told badly, so let me be precise. The intervention wasn't only nice soap. It included education, community health workers visiting households, and free supply over an extended period. Clear presents the soap as the star, and it is the interesting variable, but the surrounding scaffolding was substantial. Make it feel nice was one component of a well-funded program, not a magic trick performed alone. And there's a deeper limitation I'd want you to hold. Adding artificial immediate rewards to a delayed payoff habit is a real technique with real evidence, but there's a body of research suggesting that heavy external rewards can undermine intrinsic motivation over time. Pay a child to read, and they may read less once you stop paying. So the reward has to be small, and ideally it should be something that reinforces the identity rather than substituting for it, which is exactly why Clear's money toward the jacket version works better than a bar of chocolate. The honest summary? Use immediate rewards as scaffolding to get you across the plateau of latent potential from Chapter 1, not as the permanent reason you do the thing. If the reward is still load-bearing in a year, the habit never actually formed. So, the question. Take the good habit you're failing at, and answer this properly, not aspirationally. What does it give you in the first 60 seconds after you finish? Not what it will give you in a year, in the first minute. Because if the honest answer is nothing, I just feel tired and slightly virtuous, then you're relying on a payout that arrives in 11 months to compete against a biscuit that arrives in 11 seconds, and you have been losing that fight for entirely predictable reasons. The fix is not more resolve, it's to give the first 60 seconds something. Which brings us to Chapter 16, where that something turns out to be, for a surprising number of people, nothing more than a mark on a piece of paper. Chapter 16. How to stick with good habits every day. So, there's a stockbroker called Trent Dyersmid, working in a small suburban office in Abbotsford, Canada. Not a prestigious firm. Not a promising start. And he had a system. And the system was 2 jars. Every morning he put 120 paperclips in one jar. The other jar was empty. Then he'd make a sales call, and immediately after he'd move one paperclip from the full jar to the empty one. And he'd keep going until every clip had moved across. That's it. That's the entire system. Within 18 months, his business was bringing in $5 million. By 24, he was earning $75,000 a year, and he was later recruited away for a job paying a multiple of that.
Now, obviously the paper clips didn't make the sales, the calls made the sales, but the paper clips made the calls happen. And Clear's interest is in why such a stupid mechanism works so reliably. The answer is the fourth law. Making progress is satisfying, and visual measures provide clear evidence of your progress. The empty jar filling up is a reward you can see, delivered immediately, every single time. The sale might come in 3 months. The clip moves now. So this chapter is about the most popular version of that idea, which is the habit tracker, a simple measure of whether you did the habit, usually a calendar where you cross off each day you complete it. And Clear argues habit tracking is unusually powerful because it does 3 jobs at once. 1. It's obvious, which is the first law. A visible tracker is itself a cue. You see the calendar, you remember the habit. The record reminds you to act. 2. It's attractive, the second law. You build a streak and the streak becomes something you want to protect. Seeing progress motivates further progress. 3. It's satisfying, the fourth law. Marking the X is a small immediate reward for a habit whose real reward is distant. It's the paperclip moving. Clear's line: the most effective form of motivation is progress, and a tracker turns invisible effort into visible evidence, which is exactly what a delayed return habit is otherwise missing. There's also a fourth benefit he raises that I think is underrated. It keeps you honest. Most of us have a wildly inaccurate sense of how often we do things. Ask someone how many times they went to the gym last month and you'll get a number. Look at the actual record and it's usually lower. Measurement corrects a story we tell ourselves. Now, the practical part, and Clear is unusually sensible here about the downsides. Don't track everything. Tracking is itself a habit and it has a cost. Track the 1 or 2 things that matter most. Trying to track 15 behaviours is how people abandon the whole system in a fortnight. Automate what you can. A fitness watch counts steps without asking anything of you. The best measurement is the kind you don't have to maintain. And record it immediately after the habit. The completion of the behaviour is the cue for writing it down, which is habit stacking from Chapter 5, Doing Work Again. Now, the most valuable idea in this chapter, and possibly the most valuable in the second half of the book. Never miss twice. Because you will miss. Everyone does. Travel, illness, a bad week, a genuine emergency. Perfect streaks end. And the question that decides everything is what happens on the following day. Clear's framing. Missing once is an accident. Missing twice is the start of a new habit. And he's blunt about the maths of it. The first mistake is never the one that ruins you. It's the spiral of repeated mistakes that follows. Missing one workout doesn't matter. Nobody's fitness is decided by a Tuesday. Missing one workout and then deciding the week is written off, that's what does it. He puts it as, the all or nothing cycle of behaviour change is the trap. People treat the broken streak as evidence that they've failed, and failure permits abandonment. Whereas the honest arithmetic is, if you show up 80% of the time, you're doing far better than the person who did it perfectly for 9 days and then stopped for a year. And the line I'd write down: the difference between doing something badly and not doing it at all is enormous. The difference between doing it badly and doing it well is much smaller. There's also a caution I appreciate. Don't let the measurement become the goal. This is Goodhart's law in a habits book. When a measure becomes a target, it stops being a good measure. Track weight and you might starve yourself. Track number of workouts and you might do 15 useless ones. Track words written and you can produce a great deal of rubbish. Clear's answer is that the tracker measures whether you showed up, and showing up is genuinely the thing you want early on. But once the habit is established, the number can quietly replace the purpose, and you have to notice when that happens. Now, my honest note. Habit trackers work extremely well for some people and produce active harm in others, and I don't think the book acknowledges the second group. If you're someone who responds well to streaks, this is possibly the single highest return tactic here. If you're someone for whom a broken streak produces a genuine feeling of failure, the tracker can become an instrument for beating yourself with. I've watched people abandon a habit they'd sustained for months because the calendar had a gap in it, and the gap felt like a verdict. Never miss twice is the correct antidote, and it's easier said than felt. So my version: track the habit, not the streak. Count total days this month, not consecutive days. A count can absorb a miss. A streak can only be broken. That one change makes the tool safe for the people it currently hurts and costs the people it helps almost nothing. So, the question: what's the number you're afraid to look at? The actual count. How many times last month? Not how it felt, the count. Most people don't track precisely because they'd rather not know, and the not knowing lets them keep the flattering version. And that's a fair trade in the short run, and a very expensive one over a year. So, what's one habit where you genuinely benefit from knowing the true number? And would you be willing to find out? Which leads to chapter 17, the last of the fourth law, where the immediate consequence stops being a mark on a page and starts being another human being watching you. Chapter 17, How an Accountability Partner Can Change Everything. So a Harvard law professor called Roger Fisher, a man who'd flown as a pilot in the Second World War and later spent his career on negotiation, made a proposal in 1981 about nuclear weapons, and it is the strangest and best illustration of this chapter I've ever read. Fisher had noticed something troubling. A sitting president has access to launch codes that could kill millions of people, and would never personally see a single one of them die. The decision is abstract. It's a briefing, a code, a signature. The consequence is at an unimaginable distance. So his suggestion was this: take the nuclear launch code, put it in a small capsule, and implant that capsule next to the heart of a volunteer. The volunteer carries a large butcher's knife and accompanies the president everywhere. If the president ever wants to launch nuclear weapons, he must first, personally, with his own hands, kill one human being. He has to take the knife, open the volunteer's chest, and retrieve the code. Fisher's point: the president would then have to look at someone and understand what death is, and what an innocent death is, and that this is what happens when you launch times millions. When he put this to his friends in the Pentagon, they were horrified. One said, "My God, that's terrible. Having to kill someone would distort the president's judgment. He might never push the button." Which is, of course, exactly the point. Now, why is that in a book about habits? Because it is the fourth law in its purest possible form. We are far more likely to avoid a behavior when the consequence is immediate, personal, and painful, and far more likely to do it when the consequence is delayed and abstract. The inverted fourth law is make it unsatisfying. And the most reliable way to make a bad habit immediately unsatisfying is to add a cost that arrives right now in front of someone. And Clear's practical version is simply this: we care deeply about what other people think of us, and we do not want them to have a lesser opinion of us. That's an ancient force, Chapter 9's tribe again, and it's usually treated as a weakness. Here, it's a tool. So the mechanism is the accountability partner, someone who is watching, and whose watching creates an immediate cost for not doing the thing. Clear notes that knowing someone is watching can itself be a powerful motivator, and it costs nothing. But the stronger version formalizes it, the habit contract, a verbal or written agreement stating your commitment to a particular habit and the punishment that will occur if you don't follow through.
You find one or two people to act as accountability partners, and they sign it. He gives the example of Brian Harris, an entrepreneur from Nashville, who wrote a contract with his wife and his trainer covering his diet and weight, with specific penalties attached to specific failures, and had them sign it. Real consequences, real people, agreed in advance. Notice the structure. It's Chapter 14's commitment device again, but instead of locking away your clothes, you're using another person's regard as the lock. And the advantage of a person over a cupboard is that a person notices, and being noticed is unpleasant in a way that a cupboard cannot manage. There's a simpler version that works nearly as well for most people, and Clear mentions it. Just make the habit public. Tell people. Announce the thing. Now the gap between what you said and what you did is visible, and closing that gap is one of the strongest drives humans have. And an even simpler one. Do it with someone. Arrange to run with a friend at 7. Now not doing it means letting a specific person stand in the cold. That is a far more immediate consequence than, I will be slightly less fit in 11 months. Now, my honest note, and I have two. First, habit contracts with punishments are the tactic in this book I'd be most careful with. They work by making failure painful, and pain is a genuinely effective short-term motivator. But a system that runs on self-punishment has a way of curdling. If you're someone who already has a harsh internal voice, formalizing the punishment doesn't add discipline, it adds ammunition. Use the accountability, be careful with the penalty. Second, and more importantly, this whole chapter runs on shame, and the book doesn't say so. We don't want others to have a lesser opinion of us is shame, described neutrally. It is a real and powerful lever, and it is also the lever most likely to produce a behavior that stops the moment nobody is looking, which is precisely the opposite of a habit. Which is worth putting beside Chapter 2. Identity-based habits work because the behavior becomes who you are. Accountability works because the behavior becomes what others expect. Those are different mechanisms, and only one of them survives being alone. So, my reading. Use accountability as scaffolding early when the habit is fragile and needs an immediate consequence, and expect to take it down. If the habit still requires an audience after a year, it isn't a habit yet, it's a performance, which, if you watch the Carnegie episode on this channel, is exactly the distinction that book kept circling. Technique that comes from something real versus technique laid over a hole. So, the question. Who currently knows what you're trying to do? Not who would support you if you asked, who actually knows right now specifically what you said you'd do this week? For most people, the honest answer is nobody, and that's not an accident. Not telling anyone is a strategy. It's the strategy that guarantees you can quit without it costing anything, and we choose it precisely because it's cheap. So the question underneath is a harder one. Would you be willing to tell one person this week what you're actually trying to do? Because the moment you do, the cost of quitting stops being zero. And that, not motivation, not discipline, is the entire mechanism. Which closes the 4 laws, and Chapter 18 opens the last section of the book with the question everyone eventually asks. How much of this is even up to you, and how much was decided before you were born? Chapter 18. The Truth About Talent. When genes matter and when they don't. So here are 2 of the greatest athletes who have ever lived, and they are exactly the same height. Michael Phelps, the most decorated Olympian in history, 28 medals, and Hicham El Guerrouj, the Moroccan middle distance runner who won gold in the 1500 metres and the 5000 metres, and held the world mile record for decades. Both men are about 5'10". But Phelps has a torso like a longboat and comparatively short legs. His inseam is around 32 inches. El Guerrouj has extraordinarily long legs and a short torso. His inseam is around 34. Same height, 7 inches of difference in where the height is. And Clear asks the obvious question: could Phelps, with all that athleticism, have become a world-class distance runner? Could El Garouge have become an Olympic swimmer? Almost certainly not. Phelps's long torso and huge wingspan are close to ideal for moving through water, and close to a liability over 1500 metres. El Garouge's legs are ideal for running and would sink him. Each of them found a game where their particular body was an advantage, and if either had chosen the other's sport, they'd have been an also-ran who worked just as hard. That's the chapter. Genes do not determine your destiny. They determine your areas of opportunity. And Clear is careful, and I want to be careful with him, because this is territory where people get sloppy in both directions. He is not saying talent is everything. He's saying that hard work is necessary, and where you apply it is not a neutral choice. His line, "You can't tell if a habit is worth the effort until you find one that suits you." Genes don't remove the need for work, they direct it. They tell you what to work hard on. And it goes beyond bodies. He walks through personality, the big 5 traits which are measurably heritable: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. Your natural setting on those dials shapes which habits feel natural and which feel like swimming upstream. A highly conscientious person will find habit building genuinely easier, and that's not a moral achievement. A very extroverted person will thrive in a running club, and a more introverted one may do better alone, and neither is more disciplined. Clear's practical instruction: build habits that work for your personality rather than fighting it. If you hate the gym, don't build a gym habit and call yourself weak when it fails. Find a form of movement you don't hate. Then comes the useful part, which is how you actually find the game that suits you, given that most of us can't measure our own inseam to torso ratio for life in general. He offers the explore-exploit trade-off, borrowed from decision science. Early on, you explore. You try lots of things, take on variety, sample widely. Once you've found something promising, you shift to exploiting, going deep, compounding, becoming genuinely good. And most people get this wrong in one of 2 ways. Some explore forever and never compound anything. Others committed at 19 to something they'd barely tested and have been exploiting a bad choice ever since. Then he gives 4 questions to help you find your lane, and they're better than most career advice. What feels like fun to me, but work to others? Where your effort is lower than the effort it appears to cost. That gap is a signal. What makes me lose track of time? Where do I get greater returns than the average person? You do the same amount as everyone else and get more out. What comes naturally to me? Not what you wish came naturally, what actually does. And when nothing fits, his fallback is genuinely clever. If you can't win by being better, win by being different. Combine skills to create a niche you can be excellent in, rather than competing head-on in a game where you're a 5 out of 10. Now, the sentence that redeems the whole chapter from being a permission slip, because play to your strengths can very easily become quit anything hard. Choose the habit that best suits you, not the one that is most popular. And then do the work anyway. Genes are an advantage in the game you choose. They are not a substitute for playing it. Phelps still swam thousands of hours. Now, my honest note, and this one has 2 parts. First, this chapter is the most comforting one in the book, and comfort is exactly when to be careful. Find the thing that suits you is true, and it is also the most available excuse in the English language. Every difficult phase of every worthwhile pursuit feels, from the inside, like evidence that the thing doesn't suit you. Chapter 11 told us the middle of the work feels like failure, and this chapter hands you a respectable reason to leave at precisely that moment. The two are in genuine tension, and clear doesn't resolve it. My best attempt at a test. Do you dislike the activity, or do you dislike being bad at it? Almost everyone dislikes being bad at things. That's not a mismatch, that's the entry fee. A real mismatch is when you're competent at the thing and still feel nothing. Second, the genetics here are presented more cleanly than the science is. Heritability estimates for personality traits are real, but heritability is a population statistic, not a statement about you. It tells you how much variation in a group is associated with genetic variation under particular conditions. It does not tell you your ceiling, and it does not mean a trait is fixed. Clear is more careful than most popular writers here, but the chapter still reads as more deterministic than the evidence supports. So, the question, and this one is worth genuinely sitting with rather than answering quickly, what do you find easy that other people seem to find hard? Not what you're proud of, not what you've worked at. What costs you noticeably less than it appears to cost everyone else? Most people struggle with this question, and the reason is revealing. Anything that comes easily to you feels unremarkable, precisely because it comes easily. You assume everyone can do it. You've been standing next to your own advantage your whole life and calling it normal. So, a better route in. What do people repeatedly ask you for help with? Because other people can see it and you can't. Which brings us to chapter 19. Because once you've found the right game, there's a second problem waiting, and it's the one that ends far more careers than difficulty ever does. It isn't failure, it's boredom. Chapter 19. The Goldilocks Rule. How to stay motivated in life and work. So imagine standing on a stage in front of a room of people, telling jokes and getting nothing. Not a polite laugh, silence. Now imagine doing that for 10 years. That's Steve Martin. He started performing at 18, doing magic tricks and banjo and material that mostly didn't land, in front of audiences that were sometimes a handful of people. He spent a decade refining an act in near obscurity, 4 years of that as an outright unknown, then 4 more slowly gaining traction, and only then did it break, and when it broke enormously. He became, for a period, the biggest comedian in the world. And Clear's interest isn't the success, it's the 10 years of no laughs. Because failure in front of a live audience is an unusually pure kind of feedback, and most people cannot take it for 10 weeks, let alone 10 years. So what let him keep going? And the answer, Clear argues, is not grit in the heroic sense. It's that Martin kept the challenge at the right level, always slightly beyond his current ability, never so far beyond that it was hopeless. This is the Goldilocks Rule. Humans experience peak motivation when working on tasks that are right on the edge of their current abilities. Not too hard, not too easy, just manageable. You felt this. Play tennis against a 4-year-old and you're bored within a minute. Play against Serena Williams and you're demoralised within 1 point. Play against someone slightly better than you and you'll play for hours and forget to check your phone. In psychology, this maps on to the Yerkes-Dodson law, the idea that optimal arousal sits at a midpoint between boredom and anxiety. The task has to be hard enough to demand you and achievable enough to reward you. And Clear's specific claim, which I like because it's operational, the sweet spot is roughly 4% beyond your current ability. Not a precise number, but a useful instinct. A little bit beyond, not a lot. Now, the part that makes this chapter worth its place, because it's the real subject. The greatest threat to success is not failure, but boredom. Read that again because it's counterintuitive and I think it's true. We assume habits die because they're too hard. Mostly they die because they stop being interesting. You get reasonably good, the novelty goes, the gains slow down, and the whole thing settles into a flat, grey, repetitive thing you do. And that is when people quit. Not in the painful early weeks, in the boring middle. Clear puts it, as habits become routine, they become less interesting and less satisfying. We get bored. And then the line that I think is the single most valuable sentence in the back half of this book. The only way to become excellent is to be endlessly fascinated by doing the same thing over and over. You have to fall in love with boredom. He quotes a coach who told him the difference between professionals and amateurs, and the answer wasn't talent or work ethic. It was, professionals stick to the schedule, amateurs let life get in the way. Professionals do it on the days they don't feel like it, and crucially, they do it on the days when it's dull, which is far more days than the days when it's hard. So the practical version of the Goldilocks Rule. Keep adjusting the difficulty so the work stays just at the edge, and accept that even at the edge, most of it will feel like nothing much is happening. Now, my honest note. First, the small one. The 4% figure is a heuristic, not a measured constant. Treat it as a direction, slightly harder, rather than a number to compute. Second, the bigger one. There's a tension between this chapter and the 2-minute rule in chapter 13, and the book doesn't address it. Chapter 13 says, make it so easy you can't say no. This chapter says, peak motivation lives at just manageable difficulty, and boredom is what kills you. Those aren't contradictory exactly. One is about starting and one is about continuing. But the transition between them is where most people actually fail, and there's no guidance on when to make it. My reading, use 2 minutes to establish the behaviour, then deliberately escalate, and treat the moment the habit becomes easy as a warning rather than an achievement. Easy is the destination for a habit and the death of a skill. And a third thing worth saying about Steve Martin, since it's the anchor, 10 years of performing to indifferent rooms is a survivorship story. We're hearing it because it worked. There are people who did the same 10 years and never broke through, and we don't have their books. That doesn't invalidate the principle, but keep going through the boredom is being illustrated with the rare case where keeping going paid enormously. Which is chapter 2 of the Housel episode arriving again, if you've watched it. Be careful learning from the extremes, because that's where luck did the most work. So, the question, and it's a diagnostic, think about a habit you abandoned. Not one you never started, one you genuinely did for a while and then stopped. Now be honest, did you stop because it got too hard or because it got boring? I'd bet on boring. Almost everyone says hard and means boring, because it got too hard is a more flattering account of yourself than I lost interest in something that was working. And if it was boredom, the fix isn't more discipline. It's that the difficulty had drifted below you and you needed to move the bar, not leave the gym. Which brings us to chapter 20, the last chapter of the book proper, and Clear does something I respect. He spends it arguing against habits. Chapter 20. The downside of creating good habits. So, here's the thing I didn't expect from the last chapter of a book about habits. It's a chapter about the cost of habits. And the argument is simple and slightly unsettling. The upside of habits is that we can do things without thinking. The downside is exactly the same sentence. Because once a behaviour is automatic, you stop paying attention to it. And once you stop paying attention, you stop noticing the small errors. You become less sensitive to feedback. You fall into what Clear calls mindless repetition. And you can practice something for years and get no better at all. This is the answer to a question a lot of people have quietly wondered about themselves. How can someone have 20 years of experience and not be 20 years good? And the answer is that they had 1 year of experience 20 times. Because after year 1, the behaviour became automatic and stopped being examined. Clear's formulation, habits plus deliberate practice equals mastery. Habits get the behaviour to happen reliably and cheaply, but mastery requires you to periodically break the automaticity and look at the thing again, deliberately, critically, with attention on the part that isn't good enough. And that's the shape of a career done well. You master one part until it's automatic, then you direct your freed up attention at the next part. The habit isn't the finish line, it's what frees the capacity for the next stage. Which is why he says, mastery is a process of narrowing focus to a tiny element of success, repeating it until it's internalized, and then using that new edge to advance to the next. So the practical instruction of the chapter, build a system of reflection and review. Because if habits run without inspection, and you're not inspecting, you drift. Not dramatically, that's the danger. Slowly. Standards slip 1% at a time, exactly the way they improve 1% at a time in chapter 1. The compounding runs in both directions, and you don't feel either one on any given day. Clear gives 2 mechanisms, and I like that they're at different timescales. The annual review, done at the end of the year, asking 3 questions. What went well this year? What didn't go well? What did I learn? The integrity report, done around the midpoint, and this one is more interesting because it's about identity rather than output. The questions, what are the core values that drive my life and work? How am I living and working with integrity right now? How can I set a higher standard in the future? Notice what the second one is doing. It's checking whether your habits are still voting for the identity you actually want, because identities can quietly become cages. Clear says this plainly. The tighter we cling to an identity, the harder it becomes to grow beyond it. And he gives the examples. The athlete who cannot cope with retirement because I'm an athlete was the whole self. The soldier who cannot re-enter civilian life. The entrepreneur whose company is sold and who no longer knows what he's for. His fix is to hold identity more loosely and to define it in terms that survive change. Not I'm the CEO, but I'm the kind of person who builds and creates things. Not I'm an athlete, but I'm the type of person who is mentally tough and loves a physical challenge. Because the specific role will end, the underlying character can transfer. Now, my honest note, and it's mostly admiration with one caveat. This chapter is the reason I take the book more seriously than most in the genre. A weaker author ends on triumph. Clear ends by telling you the thing he spent 19 chapters selling has a failure mode, and names it precisely. The caveat, reflection and review is the least specific advice in the whole book, and, probably not coincidentally, the least followed. He gives you a 2-minute rule for starting a habit and an annual review for maintaining one. The asymmetry is enormous. There is no 2-minute version of reflection here, no trigger, no environment design, no friction reduction for the one practice that keeps everything else honest. Which is a bit like being handed a superb engine and a note saying, remember to service it. So if I were adding one thing to this book, it would be a 2-minute version of the review. Something like, at the end of each week, 1 sentence on what worked, 1 on what didn't. Habit stacked onto something that already happens, because an annual review is a wonderful idea that most people will do never, and a Friday sentence is a mediocre idea they might actually do 50 times a year. And 50 mediocre reviews will beat 0 excellent ones, which is, after all, this book's own argument. So, the question, and it's the one this chapter is really asking, what are you currently doing on autopilot that you have not examined in over a year? Not a bad habit, a good one.
or one that used to be good. The way you work, the way you exercise, the way you talk to the people you live with. Because the habits most likely to have quietly degraded are the ones you're proudest of, precisely because you stopped checking them a long time ago. The bad ones you know about, the good ones you assume are still fine. And the harder second half. Is there an identity you're holding on to that's now costing you something? The job title, the role in the family, the thing you've told people you are for so long that changing it would require a conversation you don't want to have. Because that identity was a vote you cast years ago, and you may have been voting the same way ever since out of nothing more than habit. Which brings us to the conclusion, and then to the last chapter, which isn't in the book.
Chapter 21. The conclusion.
The secret to results that last. So there's an ancient Greek puzzle called the Rites paradox, and it goes like this. Can a single coin make a person rich? Obviously not. Hand someone one coin and nothing has changed. So the answer is no. Now hand them another, and keep going. At some point, that person is rich. And yet at no point did a single coin do it, because we already established that a single coin can't. So when did it happen? That's the paradox, and Clear ends the book on it because it is the whole book in one image. A single coin doesn't make you rich. A single workout doesn't make you fit. A single page doesn't make you a writer. A single meal doesn't make you healthy. Every individual instance is genuinely, provably insignificant, and the accumulation is everything. Clear's version. A slight change in your daily habits can guide your life to a very different destination. Making a choice that is 1% better or worse seems insignificant in the moment, but over a lifetime it determines the difference between who you are and who you could be. He calls success a product not of one-off transformations, but of daily habits. And the sharpest line in the conclusion is this. You should be far more concerned with your current trajectory than with your current results. Because your results are a lagging indicator. Your net worth is a lagging indicator of your financial habits. Your weight is a lagging indicator of your eating habits. Your knowledge is a lagging indicator of your learning habits. Your clutter is a lagging indicator of your cleaning habits. You get what you repeat. And that means the useful question at any moment is not, how am I doing, which measures the past, but which direction am I pointing? Then he does something in the last page that I think is the correct place to land, and it circles all the way back to chapter 2. The secret to results that last is to never stop making improvements. Not because there's a finish line you'll eventually cross, because there isn't one. And expecting one is the mistake. Habits don't have a completion state. There's no version of you who has finished being a person who exercises, which is why the identity framing matters more than the outcome framing. An outcome ends, an identity continues. And it's why he says that atomic habits are not about any single improvement, but about a system that keeps improving. Small habits don't add up, they compound. That's the entire thesis, and it's the reason a book about tiny things is not a book about tiny results. Now, my honest note on the conclusion, and it's short because there isn't much to argue with. The Rites paradox is a genuinely elegant closing image, and it does something the 1% better chart at the beginning doesn't. It makes the point without pretending to be arithmetic. The paradox isn't claiming a rate of return, it's just observing, correctly, that thresholds are crossed by accumulations of things too small to notice individually. I'd go so far as to say the book should have opened with the coins and used the chart as decoration rather than the other way round. But we'll get to the chart in a minute. The other thing worth noticing, for a book this practical, the conclusion is unusually humble. There's no promise, no do this and your life transforms, just
Keep pointing in the right direction and let time do the part you can't. Which is, I think, correct. And it's also the exact point where almost every reader closes the book and does nothing. Because keep going indefinitely with no finish line is emotionally much harder to act on than 30 days to a new you. So, the question for the book proper, before we get to the honest part. Forget your results for a second. Forget the weight, the balance, the job title. If your current habits continued unchanged for 5 years, where would they take you? Not where you hope to be, where the trajectory actually points. You know the answer, roughly, and it takes about 4 seconds to arrive, and most people flinch from it slightly. Because the trajectory is honest in a way the results aren't yet. Your results still reflect the person you used to be. Your habits are already writing the next chapter, and they've been writing it for a while. And that's the book. 20 chapters of engineering aimed at a single question. Which direction are you pointing, today, in the small things nobody sees? Now, let's talk about why almost nobody who reads it does any of it. The Honest Chapter, the most actionable book that nobody acts on. So this book has sold over 20 million copies. 20 million! It has been the best-selling non-fiction book on earth for stretches of the last several years. It is by a distance the most successful practical self-improvement book of my lifetime. And I want to start with the observation that made me want to do this episode. If a book with 20 million readers, containing genuinely correct and immediately usable instructions, had worked at anything like the rate its sales suggest, we would be able to see it. Somewhere, in some population level number about exercise or savings rates or reading or screen time. We cannot. So something is going on, and I don't think it's that the advice is wrong. I've spent 3 hours telling you it isn't. The 4 laws are sound. The 2-minute rule works. Environment beats willpower. All of it holds up. Which leaves a much more interesting question. What happens between reading it and not doing it? And I think this book, more than the other 3 we've done, gives us the tools to answer that, including about itself. Let me give the case against properly first. 4 objections in ascending order of seriousness. 1. The 37.78 is not what you think it is. Here is the number everyone quotes. Improve 1% a day for a year and you end up 37.78 times better. That is real arithmetic. 1.01 to the power of 365 is genuinely 37.78. Nobody's lying. But look at what it's actually claiming. It requires that human improvement is multiplicative, that today's 1% is applied to yesterday's improved total, compounding like interest in an account. Nothing in this book demonstrates that. Nothing in psychology demonstrates it either, as a general rule. Most skill acquisition curves are the opposite shape, rapid early gains and then flattening, which is diminishing returns, not compounding ones. If you get 1% faster at running every day for a year, you do not end up 37 times faster. You end up injured. Clear is not really claiming otherwise. He uses it as illustration, but it's presented as the mathematical spine of the book. It's on the chart, and it is the single most quoted thing in it. And it's a metaphor wearing the costume of a proof. And here's why it matters, rather than being a pedantic point. The chart sets an expectation that reality will not meet, and the gap is where people quit. If you were promised compounding and you get a plateau, the plateau reads as failure, even though Chapter 1 told you plateaus are normal. The book's own opening image works against its own best insight. The Sorites paradox at the end does the same job honestly. The chart at the beginning does it dishonestly. I'd have kept the coins. 2. The systems over goals argument cannot be disproved. You do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems, is a wonderful sentence and an unfalsifiable one. Succeeded? Your system was good. Failed? Your system was bad. There is no possible outcome that would count as evidence against it, which means it isn't really a testable claim, it's a lens. Now, a lens can be extremely useful. This one is. But notice that this is precisely the criticism I made of Housel in the last episode, when his framework explained every result. Did well, tails. Did badly, fee not fine. I said then that a framework which explains everything should be held a bit more loosely than it invites. Same applies here. And it's worth noticing how comfortable an unfalsifiable framework is. It can never be wrong, which means it can never make you wrong, which means you can keep it forever. 3. Survivorship again. British cycling, Steve Martin, the Polgar sisters, Michael Phelps, Twyla Tharp, Victor Hugo. Every single one is a person or team we know about because it worked. There were other cycling programs doing marginal gains who won nothing. There were comedians who did 10 years of empty rooms and then stopped, and their absence is why you've never heard the argument, he did the small things consistently and it didn't come together. There were parents who ran the Polgar experiment on their children and produced adults who resent chess. The Housel episode made this exact objection about Ronald Reid, and it applies with equal force here. When your evidence is a collection of extraordinary outcomes, you are looking at the tail of a distribution and reading it as a method. 4. And this is the real one. The book is a perfect description of behaviour change that almost nobody performs. And I want to be precise because this is the objection that actually matters. Every other book we've done had an excuse available. Covey was hard to act on because private victories have no scoreboard. Carnegie was easy to act on and easy to misuse. Housel gave you almost no procedure at all. Clear gives you the procedure, explicitly, numbered, with worked examples and a template you could execute tomorrow morning. And people don't, which forecloses the comfortable explanation. We cannot say the problem was that nobody told us how. We were told, in enormous detail, 20 million times. So what's left? Here's what I think, and it's the argument of this chapter. The bottleneck was never information, and it was never technique. It was the thing all 4 books have been circling from different sides, and only one of them names it directly. Look at what actually happens when someone reads this book. They read chapter 1. They feel the pleasant sensation of understanding something. That sensation is nearly identical, from the inside, to the sensation of having done something. That's chapter 11, motion versus action, and the book diagnoses it accurately without ever noticing that reading the book is itself motion. Possibly the most sophisticated form of motion available. You have spent 3 hours with me and produced no repetitions. I include myself in that entirely. I've read this book more than once. I have a habit tracker I abandoned. I know the 2-minute rule, and I have not opened the document. And here's the thing that finally made sense of it for me, and it comes from putting the 4 books beside each other. Clear tells you that every action is a vote for the person you wish to become, but he doesn't tell you how to want to become that person. The entire machine, all 4 laws, every tactic, runs on there being a desired identity at the centre. Make it obvious, attractive, easy and satisfying. Obvious for what? Attractive relative to what? The whole apparatus is a delivery system, and it assumes the destination is already loaded. For a lot of people, it isn't. They have an identity they think they should want, absorbed from other people. Chapter 9's tribe, doing its work invisibly. And they build habits pointed at it, and the habits fail, and they conclude they lack discipline. They don't lack discipline. They're voting in an election they don't care about, which is a Covey problem. It's the private victory. It's the part that has no scoreboard and no tracker and no 2-minute version. And it's the reason I don't think any of these 4 books is complete alone. So let me close the set. because this is the fourth and last one, and the four of them make a shape. Covey is the destination, who you actually are underneath, and what you actually want. Character before personality. He's right that nothing else works until that's settled, and he's right that it's the hardest to do because nobody can see you doing it. Carnegie is the drills. Don't wait to become a better person. Behave like one, today. 30 principles, starting now. He's right that behaviour is a route to character, and not merely a mask over it. Housel is the accounting. What your character costs you in money, and what money was actually for, which turns out to be control over your own time. And clear is the mechanism, the engineering, how a behaviour actually gets installed in a human being, laid out with more precision than anyone before him. 4 instruments, 1 question. The man in the car from the Housel episode, the one buying respect he'll never receive, could read all 4. Clear would help him build the habit. Carnegie would fix the strategy. Housel would show him the bill. And Covey would ask him why he needed the respect in the first place. Only one of those 4 addresses the reason. The other 3 are, in the end, extremely good machinery pointed at a target somebody else chose. So, the tests. 3 of them, as always, and they're uncomfortable. Test 1. What have you actually done since the last book? If you watch the Housel episode, or the Carnegie one, what changed? Name the specific behaviour. I ask because if the honest answer is nothing, then adding a 4th book to the pile is not going to help, and you should notice that pattern now rather than after the 5th. There is a version of this channel that is just a very pleasant way of not changing anything, and I'd rather say that out loud than pretend otherwise. Test 2. Name your 2-minute version. Out loud. Now. Not, I should exercise more, the sentence. After I, existing thing, I will, 2-minute thing. If you can't say it in one breath, you have not decided, and everything in this book is downstream of deciding. That's chapter 5. The motivated group performed identically to the group told nothing. Only the group who wrote the sentence moved. You are currently in the motivated group. So am I. It measured as no different from nothing. Test 3. The hard one. Who chose the identity? Take the habit you most want. Go underneath it. What kind of person are you trying to become by having it? And then, whose idea was that? Because if you can trace it to a specific person, a parent, a colleague, someone from school, an algorithm that showed you the same lifestyle 4,000 times, then the reason the habits won't stick may not be that they're too hard. It may be that you're voting for a candidate you never actually liked. Here's the honest bottom line. Every idea in this book amplifies whatever is already there. That's the same conclusion I reached about Carnegie and about Housel, and I find it either reassuring or depressing depending on the day. And this time, I think it's the point rather than a coincidence. Give these 4 laws to someone who knows who they want to be, and they are the best set of tools ever written for getting there. Genuinely. I'd hand this book to that person over anything else in the genre. Give them to someone who doesn't, and you get a very well optimized person moving efficiently in a direction they never chose, which is worse than drifting because it's faster. The book cannot supply the destination, it can only get you there. So if you take one thing out of 3 hours, I'd make it this, and it isn't one of the 20 chapters. Habits are votes. That's the best idea in the book, and it's true. But an election is only worth winning if you wanted the office. So before you build the system, before you design the environment, before you buy the tracker, spend one evening on the question the machinery can't answer. Who are you actually trying to become? And did you pick that, or did you inherit it? Now, I'm not going to tell you what to do with any of this. Genuinely, I don't know your life, I'm not qualified, and I've been extremely clear that I fail at this myself. Maybe you do the one thing. Pick the 2-minute version and do it tomorrow, and let it be badly done. Maybe you go back and do the habit scorecard from chapter 4, which takes 10 minutes, costs nothing, and which I'd guess fewer than 1 in 100 readers of this book has ever completed. Maybe you close this and change nothing. And honestly, that's fine. That's genuinely fine. It's your life, and you know things about it that I don't. But there was a habit in your head at the start of this. I know there was, because I put it there. The one you've tried to start about 4 times. So before you go, one question. Not what the habit is. Why do you want it? And if the answer arrives fast and clean, and it's yours, then everything in the last 3 hours will work, and you should go and do the smallest possible version of it today. And if the answer is slow, or borrowed, or you find yourself explaining it rather than saying it, then that's the thing to fix first, and no amount of engineering will substitute. That's it. That's the book, and that's the set.